I'm alive and well. Good to see you guys. And
Absolutely.
the thing is, I also know that I have between the three of you, we have all the winners. We have all the winners.
Absolutely.
So somewhere, I would hate to think that well, I wouldn't put it beyond us, but I'd have to think that certainly of four of us, and I guess Tony will be with us, that that we would be 5 for 5 on any single game within the tournament, certainly within the first round. That it
And
would
I
be at
made,
least
I,
4-1.
yeah, that's right. Last night I made the dumbest pick in my whole life.
Oh,
I
you were
have
on San
sent.
Diego State?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was
Me too.
absolutely. I that was disgusting.
Yeah.
Well,
And,
sometimes you
and
can't see, you can't take into account sometimes with stats and things of that nature when it comes to emotion.
Yeah.
And when a team hears for 24 hours that they don't deserve to be in the tournament, and all this other stuff about anti-North Carolina, how they're going to come out. I mean, they're just going
Absolutely.
to come out
Absolutely.
smoking.
Right.
yeah,
And
but
that's
it was
exactly what they did.
Steve Mackinnon on VEASAN wrote an article about the Mountain West and broke it down. Since 19 to 2003, they've covered like 22% of their point spreads
Yeah.
in the tournament.
Since what?
And
Since what year?
I think 2003.
Well, that's
You
a
talking
long
about
time ago. I'd be
you
more
talking about
interested in the
North
last four.
Carolina, Jim?
No,
Pardon
Mountain
me?
West.
Are you, the Mountain West?
Yes.
I'd
I
be
mean,
more interested in the last 5 years.
well, they have it from 2009 also, but nothing is good. It's all
No,
bad. It's all bad.
Except for San Diego State, who made that deep run a couple of years ago.
That was the only exception. Now, today or this week, we have one of those teams favored over Memphis.
Yeah, Colorado
Which
State.
can you remember the last time a 12 was favored over a 5?
It has happened very,
Four
very rarely.
times.
And maybe how many times?
4 times.
Since,
Really?
And what was the result?
2-2 straight up and against
Oh,
the
of
spread.
course.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's useless. Yeah.
You
What
see,
Figures.
since
I'm happy that actually Mark's back in his background thing because it looks like he's on vacation in I don't know where, Singapore maybe.
I call it Paradise Valley, Arizona.
Oh,
that looks
okay.
nice. By the way, Mark, how far back did you go for that research on the 12s and 5s?
1991.
Okay.
Okay, that's a little ways. Okay, but I mean, we got Marquette in New Mexico. We've got Colorado State,
And
and
Utah State.
Utah State, right? I mean, what's the chances? And I'm going 3-0 or 0-3 based on
0-3 is
that
probably
record.
a better chance than 3-0.
You're
I think
probably
so.
right.
Yeah, I think so.
So where are the
The problem is I have my money on Colorado State already before I realized how bad of a bet that was.
Well, I can see where the odds makers fall in love with this team. They're about as hot as any team in the country.
Yeah.
Uh,
But that's against Mountain West competition.
it is, but there's
Yeah.
also no respect for Memphis whatsoever in that number. None.
No.
Who's a really
Although
a nice
Memphis did not exactly was not exactly impressive in their late season run.
They
But
have
then again,
tremendous.
they had a bid locked up.
They have tremendous athletes on that
Yes.
team.
Yeah.
I mean, comparatively, Colorado State doesn't have players equal to that.
No.
Yeah, it really gets confusing when you start matching up these conferences. Yeah.
well, we'll find that out.
See, one of the other things I liked about San Diego State, and again, just looking for things. So when I look at a lot of these teams, I don't take a look at what they do in conference play as much as I look at what they do in out of conference play, November, December. And San Diego State had some nice wins. They defeated Creighton, and more impressively, they defeated Houston.
Yeah, but that, like you said, though, Andy, that was way back.
Right, but it does show their potential.
With the portal and all the transfers that have taken place, the in my opinion, this is my opinion, the early season games, November, December, where these teams have not yet gelled, where the coaches really don't know what they have. I think throwing those records out and only looking at maybe the last 10 games might be more effective.
One would think so, but remember, even in November, December, both teams in a game are going through that same situation of developing. And if one team is more successful, otherwise, strength of schedule considers the entire season. Maybe you look at it, but strength of schedule for the last 15 games, basically 15 conference games.
That's true too.
And so there's always trade-offs in determining how to look at various stats.
Well,
now, you
like
could go with talent.
You look at these quad one things where North Carolina won 1 out of 12 and West Virginia had 6 wins.
Yeah.
I mean, the argument is valid, but when you compare, so North Carolina goes out and knocks off a Mountain West Conference team that's been crap for a couple of years. So how much do you think? Then now they're favored over Ole Miss.
And on talent, they should be.
You believe North Carolina is more talented?
I think they've got more talented players overall. Mississippi has a real good coach.
Even though the ACC had a down year and the SEC is so much higher rated.
Yeah, I mean, if you believe what the recruiting reports are, you'd give North Carolina an edge over Ole Miss. You'd give North Carolina an edge over most teams in the country. Maybe not as much as you did 5 years ago, and Roy Williams was still there. But they still
blue blood program. They're always going to recruit, right?
Yeah, they do get the blue bloods. That's for sure.
I mean, Duke has not missed all that much since Coach K left. It's only been a few years, but they're still getting the blue chip athletes.
You know, it's ironic, Jim. You mentioned about the transfer portals and helping these teams out this year. When I was putting the Playbook tournament guide together here, we were looking at returning starters, and there's just an absolute dearth of 5 returning starters this year.
Yeah.
I think there's only 2 teams in all of Division I that had 5 returning starters, 2 or 3.
Really?
But, yes.
Wow.
And it's because of they just raided the transfer portal. They They built a roster that way. In fact, Rick Pitino is on record as saying he will not recruit high school players. He's going to go after the kids that are there right now.
The experience, absolutely.
Right.
But they're older, their bodies are more developed, etc. Sure.
So my point here is there were a total of 5 teams in this tournament that had 0 returning starters coming back this year. And I used to use it as a tool to begin the season and figure that these teams are going to be slow to start, and maybe 1 or 2 of them might make the tournament. Well, 5 teams made the tournament this year that had 0 returning starters: St. John's, Louisville, Drake, Vanderbilt, and Kentucky. And I believe, honestly, the reason they make the tournament here is because of the Rick Pitino approach. Just go out and raid all of these transfer portal players here. That's exactly what
I think 3 of the teams you mentioned were Kentucky, Louisville, and St. John's. And those are all teams that recruit quality players throughout the years, especially with Pitino now at St. John's. The other 2 you said were Drake and Vanderbilt. Drake, of course, has been a team that, this is their, 3rd straight year of winning the Missouri Valley, and they've got some experience, although not in terms of returning starters. And Vanderbilt is a team that can't attract the kind of talent that the other teams in the SEC can, but apparently they are well coached and they have done better than expected. So those 5 teams, of those 5, Drake and Vanderbilt are probably the surprise for being here because they don't attract the quality athletes, and they are the teams that normally provide their best players to the blue blood teams in the transfer portal.
Drake is a program that went the exact same route that St. John's did. McCollum was a new head coach, and he went out and he just loaded up on transfers and got the best of the best in playing in a mid-major conference, and it really obviously helped them because this team is really, I think, head and shoulders clearly the best team in the mid-majors.
That's one of the more interesting matchups going up against a Missouri team that likes to force the pace but can't win on the road.
Yeah.
Well, when you talk about that particular team, that game, you have a style of fast-paced versus very slow, deliberate, excellent defensive team in Drake that has some problems on offense sometimes because they go into slumps for 5 minutes and they don't do anything. But that type of situation over the years has produced a lot of upsets.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, let's see here. Drake averages 70 points a game. They allow just over 58. Missouri, of course, 84 points a game, but they allow about 74. So it's a question of styles. We may say the same thing with St. Mary's and Vanderbilt.
Very much so. Yes. Yeah. Very much. I mean, that's if you're going to slow the pace down, each point that the odds maker is giving you becomes more valuable,
Right?
because you're not going to have as many possessions. So that, and a lot of people don't talk about, but the average fan doesn't think of it that way. But that is mathematically an equation that does work.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we see like a final matchup, what the total will be. For example, if it's St. John's against Houston, or I don't know if St. Mary's is in the bracket. You just wonder how low a total
Andy,
would
that's
be.
exactly who I've got. St. John's against Houston.
Oh,
In your bracket?
Yes, I do.
Let me see who I have. I think I have that as well. Yes. Yeah, I have St. John's and Houston.
There we go.
no kidding! Wow.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
I like how
have
you're
St.
thinking, Andy.
Yeah.
Boy, I tell you what, you got two great coaches, and that's another factor is the coaching.
Yeah.
Although I would not have thought that the San Diego State coach would have gotten destroyed like that last night. I mean, he's a very good coach.
I think what
love that.
Andy said, though, Jim, it was all a matter of they went into a volcano that was ready to erupt.
Yeah.
Or Greg said
Yeah.
they were
Greg
ready
said,
to
yeah.
erupt. you know?
Excellent point.
Right.
I mean, the whole national media, West Virginia's suing and everything, but yeah, they had a lot to be upset about. Yes.
In fact, we're going to talk a little later on the show about, what teams do we see a surprise to make it to the Final Four, the Sweet 16 and whatnot. And
I'll tell you
go ahead.
I was going to say, how about that sub-regional to open it up? I think I don't know if it's Thursday or Friday, but it's the one in Providence with Arkansas, Kansas, St. John's, and Omaha. 3 NCAA championship winning coaches. A couple of them, I think it's Patino and was it?
We got Self.
Bill
You got
Self.
Self
and Calipari. I think I don't know. Has Self won 2 tournaments with Kansas, or just
There's
the one?
so many. They run together for me, Andy.
Yeah, but you got 3 out of the 4 guys have won an NCAA tournament.
Exactly.
Which is kind of interesting. That Arkansas, Kansas, the Kansas versus Kansas with the AR in front of its name will be an intriguing matchup for 2 teams that have great coaches with great resumes, but both of which underachieved, I think, this year. Kansas, weren't they the blue ribbon #1 pick at the top of the start of the season, I believe?
I actually thought they were, yeah.
Yeah.
Andy, that's a great find on your part, literary find. That's
Yes.
Kansas with an AR in front of it.
Only Andy could find that.
Yes, he could.
And no drugs are involved
Nice.
in that research.
Well, guys, let's get this thing kicked off here. We got a big show on tap here, and I'm really looking forward to the show because everybody loves March Madness. I know we're all geeked up, and it doesn't get to be much better of a time in the sports wagering world than it is right now. We got the NFL football draft coming up. We'll be talking about that soon down the road on the shows. NFL just went through their free agency steals and thefts and so forth and whatnot. But this is going to be all about March Madness basketball on this particular show. And with that, Greg, I want to ask you this question here. As we started the show, and I guess before I do it, did you get the Playbook Preview Guide magazine? I know I re-emailed it to you. Did it show up?
Yes.
Okay, good. Anything that we're looking at here now to begin this conversation about seeding, because it's all about seeding. And when it comes to handicapping the March Madness tournament, to me, it's unlike any other handicap per se, because myself personally, I think there are 6 different handicaps involved within the tournament, and they all happen to be within each round to round. Every personality or every perspective changes. And I say that probably because I'm drawn into my database, and the database just segregates how teams fare in various different rounds. And we see it throughout the NCAA basketball tournament. Almost every year, there are always the Cinderella teams. And so we can take those teams and see how they advance into the second and the third round, and how their teams do off back-to-back underdog wins and all sorts of things just like that. But, Greg, I'm going to ask you this to start it off here. As far as the seedings go in this NCAA basketball tournament, what, in your first initial opinion, do you feel was the most overseeded basketball team?
I don't know. I might be looking at, tell you the truth, Alabama. I know that they've been a really strong team most of the year, but we've seen in a lot of these games over the last several weeks against the better competition, the Auburns and the Floridas, that they get run out of the gym most of the time. Yeah, they had a big comeback win against Auburn in that second game, but they give up a ton of points. I think they're so vulnerable as a 2 seed that when I take a look at all the other 2 seeds, I think that is kind of, in my opinion, what makes the East a little bit easier to navigate through. I don't think it's a very tough region for Duke.
So Jim, when the drawing happened, was there anything that happened? You said, no way should they be there. You know, what team do you think would have been that team that?
Well,
no
I would have said North Carolina shouldn't have been
in the tournament.
But obviously that was wrong, and I should.
No. I'll have a debate with you right away on that, Jim, because I think a lot of people feel that way. I think that's 2 completely different arguments. I think the argument of whether or not a team is in the playoffs in college football or college basketball in the playoffs is, once that argument's over with, it's done. That's it. And then if North Carolina does well with the tournament, that doesn't mean that we were wrong, that they shouldn't have been in. That's a complete, because how many times, just look at North Carolina State last year. They barely got in. They only got in because they made that dramatic run into the ACC tournament, and they got all the way to the Final Four. So any team can make a run. North Carolina, Indiana, if they got in, they could make a run. But so I disagree. I think that I don't think you're wrong. I think if you felt that way against North Carolina, I think you should still feel that way.
Well, you can make a call to the governor of West Virginia and make that argument with him to see how
He's
you
busy
do.
with a lawsuit, Jim.
Auburn, I thought was rated too high off 3 losses in their last 4 games. I think they flattened out. They peaked.
By the way, I'll just interrupt for a moment, because that was a team I was going to say. Not that they were overseeded or under. They should not have been the number 1 overall seed based upon what Jim just said.
No.
I made a $200 bet at, I'm not going to mention the name of the book, and they would, if you could pick the 4 number 1 seeds in order, you could win 14,000. So I made that bet. I made 2 of those bets. One, I had Duke first, Houston second, Auburn third, and Florida fourth. The next one I did, I reversed Florida and Auburn. And of course, I lost both those bets, so I lost $400, but I had a chance of winning 14,000. I didn't think Auburn should be close to the number one seed. Duke did get that, of course. But then I could really think of Auburn should have been on a 2 line instead of a 1 line. But then you got to look at the quality of work and see they go back to November, and I don't think November and December should count. I think it should be the last 10 games, maybe 12 games should have more weight than the first 12.
Well, if you're Duke, Jim, and if you would have, on your 4 teams, you had the right 4 teams, you maybe should have somehow boxed them or round robin them or something, but you still need a key team.
I wish I had, but if I did that, I wouldn't have won very much, because with Duke, the way it came out. But
12 combinations.
In making the Auburn case, this in our tournament guide, this is what we called out the fact of is I wondered the same thing. Why is Auburn the overall number 1 seed in this tournament? I understand they had more quad 1 wins than any other team. They also
because they played more quad 1 teams because of the SEC strength of
exactly.
And I think it was absolutely a disgrace that 14 SEC teams got in.
Pitiful.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
that,
it is. It is.
because you know why? Because they build their numbers up by going. They all go like 11-0 or 10-1 in pre-conference play. So they've already got 10 wins ahead of the rest of the field, and then they beat up on each other, but they don't beat up on each other enough to draw their quad one rating down.
That's exactly what the SEC does in football also, Andy.
Exactly.
These pancakes build up their record.
And they play them in November. They don't play them in September like everybody else. So when they're playing, Furman on November 10th, well, everybody else is playing another ranked team, and any of those teams lose, the SEC teams moves up because they just had a 55-3 win.
So what is the justification of Auburn being this number one seed? They lost to Duke earlier in the year. They lost, I believe, I could be wrong on this. Is it 2 of their last 3 games, 2 of the last 4 games? They did not play well down the stretch here, obviously.
They lost 3 out of 4.
There you go.
4. Yeah.
And yet they're the number one overall seed. Tell me what I'm missing here. I don't get it. I don't understand.
Well, you all know this. I mean, it's not a surprise. A lot of this is politics.
No.
It's money and it's politics. It's about who's sitting on the board and who's the president of this and who's in that.
You mean like the North Carolina AD being the head of the committee and not having any influence on everybody else? Even though they don't sit on the discussions when they're talking about North Carolina.
And they escort him out of the room so he can't have a say. But what happens when he walks back in the room and you eliminated his team?
Yeah.
No, come on, no. That's not.
Yeah, unfortunately, those are humans who are making the decisions. Unfortunately, they're not robots. Now, robots go by the numbers, and they would take a look at some of those things. But you cannot help but be influenced by who's in the room.
Well, Mark and I have been doing this for 6 decades, and we've always had an argument. I guarantee you we always had an argument somewhere along the line about, not with each other, but with the committee about what they've done. And it's always been about politics. It's who's doing it, who scratches, so who's back and all that. But that's the way it is. There's more good to it than bad. Unfortunately, we focus a lot on the bad. But
I've mentioned it before that there should be a limit on not inviting any at-large team that does not have, I'm going to say, at least a winning record within their conference. I don't care how tough the conference is or how soft the conference is. You have to prove in your conference. Okay,
I agree. I agree with that.
Which sort of leads me to on the overseeded teams. I would argue that a number of those SEC teams are overseeded because they had so many in the tournament. I'll say Kentucky as a number 3 might be an overseed, or maybe, I'll go to Wisconsin, for example, in the Big Ten, perhaps being overseeded as a number 3, despite the fact that they made it to the championship game, which, by the way, they blew a lead.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Wisconsin. They had to play 4 games in 4 days. And in the first game, they shot 19 out of 34 from 3. And I think in the last game, they shot 6 out of 39 from 3. You think the 4 days might have taken away the legs?
I think that's the point here, though, Jim, is them being overseeded. If they were strong caliber enough of a team, they wouldn't have put themselves in the position to have to play 4 games in 4 days.
Oh, that's true, too.
Well, not only that, they'd be able to protect a nice lead when there's only, 5 minutes to go in the final game that they're playing in the tournament? Because remember, the other team is also playing. I think Wisconsin was seeded maybe 3 and Michigan 4, or vice versa. So they both played the same number of games, I believe, to reach the championship game. At most, it was a 1-game difference.
Well, I had Wisconsin on my list of overseeded, and I also had Arizona on the list here, guys, as well. And I think that's a name and reputation selection there as well. This is another basketball team that did not come home strong. They wobbled down the stretch. Arizona.
That's very true. Yeah.
So I think they were kind of seated a little bit too high in the fact that they made the top 4. Greg, your thoughts about teams that you think may have been a little bit too high as far as the seeding goes?
Well, we started. I mentioned Alabama.
Yes.
So, and I think you guys you followed it up perfectly by going through pretty much a lot of the SEC. So I think we're all in agreement, even though we all know that the SEC was definitely the best conference in college basketball this year. I
will say that they had the best record conference-wise, again, because they load up on those soft schedules in November and December, and then so they get a head start. They don't schedule very, very difficult, not like the ACC. They do have the ACC, SEC Challenge, but I take a look at some of those teams that the ACC played compared to the other 3 major conferences. Well, of course, they're going to have more games overall. They got more teams in the conference.
That's the key, is that if you want to go by percentages, then I might, let's have a discussion on who we think might have like the top 5 teams. And now I would only be able to look at the Big Ten, really the Big 12, because
I could throw the ACC in there as well. They're a major
well,
conference.
yeah,
down conference this year, but they're a major. Conference.
That conference was
Rick Pitino wants the Big East to merge with the ACC, and the way things are going, that just might happen because we're going to these big conferences.
merge.
Yeah.
Okay.
24
so 40 teams in the conference.
He said that yesterday.
The only problem with that is that the Big East is largely a basketball-only conference.
True.
Yeah, well, I think the merger might happen for basketball only. Andy, could it be an exception?
Well,
that
that's like Notre Dame being
football?
a basketball member in the ACC, not a football member.
Correct.
Okay, excellent. Yeah.
All right, let's spin this around the other way, guys. We talked about the teams that were the most overseeded. How about the underseeded guys? And Jim, you threw out Gonzaga.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
You thought that they should have been seeded a little bit higher than that.
Well, when you look at the Bart Torvik and the Ken Palms and all those rating systems that don't always work so well in tournaments like this, but during the year it does. They're good to follow, but I'm not too sure they work in the postseason because of the different conferences you're dealing with. But they have the ability to beat you by 30 and lose by 2. And that their numbers are enormously better.
They're outstanding.
Yeah, they're enormously better when you look at those ratings. I mean, you could make them a 10-point favorite over Georgia easily by looking at those numbers. So putting them on that line, yeah, they should have been rated higher based off of that. Now, they did lose twice to St. Mary's, which I think is a better team, better coach team, deliberate, more, let's say not better coach, but more consistent team.
Great rebounding team. Right.
Yeah, yep. Yeah. They do a lot of more things right. They may not have the athleticism, but they have the quality of the club is very high.
Well, that's what they faced a long while back in this tournament, is the fact that they come out of a conference that really doesn't hold a lot of esteem.
No.
And because of that, they've outplayed that in the NCAA basketball tournament. You know, they forced and barged their way through because of how they demolished those teams and every other team on their schedule. And they've really done rather well in the NCAA basketball tournament. I'll say rather well. I'll put a little caveat in that. They're horrible as favorites in this tournament. I think they're like 2-9 to the spread, last 11 land points. And they've never beat a number 1 seed in this tournament here either. So they may not have that opportunity to do that where they're seated here right now. So this might be a little bit more beneficial for Gonzaga to be seated where they are, because they're all of a sudden they're not the hunted so much as they were before. They're the hunter.
They're definitely not the hunted, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Right.
Andy, who do you think came in seated a little bit too low as far as the seedings were shook out?
I thought Louisville deserved to be better than a number 8 seed. Having to play not too far from Lexington, Kentucky didn't help, going up against a number 1 seed. I thought, sometimes when you look at, I always felt that conference champions should get a little bit of a benefit in the seeding, and certainly teams that are competitive. We remember when you're seeded 9 or 8, it basically means you have one opportunity and then you're expected to be eliminated because you faced the number 1 seed. So I thought Louisville was a much better team, that they should not be required to face a number 1 seed in the second round in the Saturday Sunday game. So I thought that was a poor seeding, especially because they're a little bit close to home, but there's also going to be a lot of Kentucky people who will come down the road just to razz the Louisville fans because they love basketball.
Greg, what about you? Who got
I agree.
Too low?
I agree with Louisville because if anything, even though I've with the one team that they're seated 3 spots behind is actually the team that I like in the ACC is Clemson.
Yeah,
but they just beat Clemson. And matter of fact, I don't know if they beat them twice this year, but anyway, they beat Clemson, and they're 3 spots away from Clemson. Yeah, I don't understand. Didn't Louisville win like 20 of 21 games or something like that before they lost to Duke in the ACC championship game? And now look, here's what probably is the reason they're doing that is because they do have an injury. issue on the team. Both teams do, Louisville and Creighton. And I thought that remark by the commissioner, whoever made it, I think it was the commissioner of the committee, talking about how basically saying that the reason that they eliminated West Virginia was because of the injury to DeVries. And they do seem to take this into account. And I get it, especially at the end of the season, when you've had a long season and you've built a team surrounding certain core players, and one of those really big core players is out and he's not going to be around. Okay, I can understand that. But DeVries was lost in the first 10 games of the season.
Exactly.
And West Virginia still played 20 other games without him. And you're going to hold it against them that this kid hasn't been with them?
Should not have been effective.
It's not like Kenyon Martin being injured, in the conference tournament for Cincinnati that cost them like the number 1 overall seed or something?
Yeah.
If you're lost in November or early December, again, in the pre-conference period that we've all been talking about, that should not disqualify you.
So in that same vein, guys, do you feel that the committee boosted Auburn to the number 1 slot ahead of Duke because of the Cooper flag injury, the possibility of that?
I think that's very possible, yes.
Yet, despite the fact, by the way, that Duke won the tournament without him.
Yes.
ACC.
Well, the problem is, at some point in time, he's supposed to come back, and even though he probably will, we don't know what kind of condition he'll be in. He may not be 100%.
I think it when you're talking about that decision, as much as I agree with you guys that if you were going to put an SEC team, especially at number 1, it should have been Florida.
Absolutely.
But if you're going to do Auburn against Duke, then I think that's the reason. Is they looked at it and they said, look, the SEC conference was clear and above, according to them and a lot of people, and I'm not going to argue with them, the best conference in college basketball. ACC probably had the worst season of the existence of the college. I've never seen ACC this bad before. And so to put Duke in there, when you saw Duke's non-conference resume, they basically won just about as many games as they lost against quality teams. They were like a 500 team against quality teams. That shouldn't be a number 1 seed. So I think that's probably really why they did it. But I think they should have, if they were going to go that route, they should have taken Florida.
Andy, underseeded teams. Who's at the top of your list?
Oh, I think I mentioned Louisville.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. You did.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I fell asleep on that. That's right. You did. And Greg agreed with you. As far as I'm concerned, I think Drake being number 11 is just an underseed. There's no respect at all. And back in the days when the mid-major, everybody was targeting and seeing who's that mid-major is going to be the Cinderella type team. I feel that they were this team this year. 30 wins speaks for itself.
5 straight years of 25 wins or more.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 5 straight years of 30 wins or more.
Yes, 5 for 30.
Them in Houston.
And the other guy I think was a little bit seated too low, I think, was UConn. And I'm saying that largely based on name and reputation. You have a 2-time defending champion that's won 12 games in a row, covered the spread all 12 times, running coming into this tournament. And they are the defending national champion. In our tournament guide, we broke this down. This is kind of really a neat stat. That defending champions in the NCAA basketball tournament, the last 5 have come back in the first round the next year. All have won and all have covered. Every win was by a double-digit margin, and the average win was by 31 points a game. I think you're going to see a focused UConn basketball team, at least in the first game of this tournament here. And if it's enough to get them into possibly a Sweet 16 round, then the justification of them being seated too low would verify itself.
I have a question on that, Mark. Maybe you have the numbers. In that, was it 5-0? I think you said. Where was the defending champion seated? Were they seated as low as UConn is this year, or were they seated higher, or do you not have that info?
Well, that's a great question. I don't have it here at the tip of my. All I did was in the database. I just brought up the defending seeds and saw game 1, and there they were. Blah blah blah. I didn't see what their seeds were, and it probably goes a long way toward that. But I don't want to jump in front of 5-0 average win by 31 points. I think you're going to.
By the way, they did UConn no favor as defending champ, a number 8 seed, meaning they're going to face a number 1 seed in the second round. no
Yes, they did.
respect being paid to a defending champions that still had an outstanding season and still has enough talent from last year to be a contender. They are likely to be eliminated, assuming they get by Oklahoma, and that's not necessarily a given. They're likely to not see the second weekend going up against Florida.
Yeah, I want to remind everybody out there that you're tuned in. This is the Mark Lawrence Against the Spread podcast from Playbook, and we are now being aired in part of ProLine TV, and you have to subscribe to this channel. Do yourself a favor, do us a favor, and subscribe to ProLine TV. You'll do that, and you'll be notified of our shows, upcoming shows, and what everything is all about. You'll also be able to watch not just our show and Jim Feist's Pizza Show, which is going to become a national show as well. Andy Isco doing all of his great bits of information here, and everything that Greg DePalma does with all of these interviews that he does. He's the interview master of the podcast world. All available here at ProLine TV. So subscribe now. Hit the like button and subscribe. You'll do us a big favor, and you'll do yourself a big favor as well.
By the way,
Mark,
I'm going to be leaving here at about 11:30 to go do the pizza show, which I think we have JVT and Wes Reynolds on today.
Good guess.
Our last show, yes, and our last show will be April 9th until August. But as I talked to Greg the other day, we're going to do a daily and maybe a couple days a week show, myself, and bring on guests. And of course, I'd like all of you to be part of that. And we'll bring on other people as well. So we'll keep the thing going. It's as a restaurant, it's not paying off this time of year for the restaurant to take up that much space and do the production and everything. So, which is understandable, but it's a great show. We bring on great people that know how to bet, and actually a lot of them bet for a living, which is hard to do because, it's hard to pick winners. It's hard to overcome all the mathematical stuff and the money management issues. All these people have done that. So many good people. And Mark, most of them. And Andy, most of them know you very well also, because they, I always tell them when I'm doing podcasts with two of you, they all know who you guys are and respect you immensely.
That's because we're so old.
Being old has very few benefits. But
Being around a lot.
That's one of them, yes.
By the way, I wanted to comment, Mark, on Drake. And
Yes.
I think you had it in the newsletter. They only played one team that made the field of 68, and that was Vanderbilt. And they did win that on a neutral court earlier in the November-December period. And I think that might be a reason why they are one of the lower-seeded conference champions, strength of schedule,
Right.
because the conference itself was – Missouri has always been Missouri's been sort of like the Atlantic 10 as far as the mid-majors go. I mean, I consider the Big East a major conference in basketball, but as far as the mid-majors go, probably the Atlantic 10 and Missouri Valley have been the two strongest consistently over the years as far as depth. Some people might throw West Coast in there because of Gonzaga and St. Mary's, but they weren't that far below the major conferences, but they were still mid-majors, and I think that had a lot to do with, also why a lot of teams would not want to schedule them, because they are the major teams wouldn't want to schedule them because they are the next best conferences in line that could have a lot of talent that might normally make reserves on some of those major conference teams.
In the past, people used to talk about strength of schedule as a very meaningful stat in handicapping these divisions against divisions. But lately, it's been more about quad ones. Mark, do you keep the strength of schedule numbers on these conference and teams?
I really rely on the Ken Palm rankings, Jim, when it comes to the strength of schedule. It's so mathematical, and it does take up a lot of time. And unless you have a program written to really churn that out, I don't do that. I don't have that. So I kind of go to the source or a source per se. Andy, do you follow strength of schedules as far as college basketball is concerned?
I do certainly want to be evaluating the quality of non-conference schedules, because that's really what I'm looking for at tournament time, how these teams do, like I mentioned about Drake, to sort of understand perhaps why they got the great record and they got in. It's not so much who you play and who you defeat. It's the fact that you don't play that many teams in like a quad one. Although, again, quad one has its own failings as far as the basis of how it's developed, what the formula is used, because, again, it's based upon – that's like the old RPI index, which is basically the same thing. You rewarded teams based upon their win-loss record, even if those many of those wins come against lower-tier teams. I think that's why they ended up going to a quad one. But the quad one still takes into account, I believe, a lot of the teams that fatten their record against quality teams. Maybe, and again, I don't know what metric you would use. Maybe the Ken Palm efficiency, overall efficiency. Maybe what you do is you give an efficiency. You evaluate a team's schedule by assigning, if a team is 54th in the efficiency, maybe you use 54 as the number for evaluating that team. You add up all the numbers for teams playing conference and non-conference, you divide it by the number of games, and maybe that's a little bit more fair as far as evaluating a team. And furthermore, what I would break it down into, okay, you've played 20 teams, let's say out of conference, or let's say 15 teams. You break it down, of the 15 teams, what's their efficiency and what's your win-loss record? You may find that you're 11-2 in the games against the teams that rank low, and you're 2-0 against the teams that you defeated in that method.
Well, when I find an extra 12 hours in a day, Andy, I'll start doing that.
Yeah, and it would have to be the 3-day of the baseball all-star break as well.
I understand completely. Hey, guys, let's turn it over to the brackets now, and let's put some weight into difficulty as far as these brackets are concerned, how they weighted and shaked out here. Greg, what did you see as being the most difficult bracket of the 4 brackets in this year's tournament?
It would be the West. I'm going to go with the West. I thought the Midwest was also kind of tough, but having, you got St. John's in Florida. That's a really strong one too. And also, you got some, as you talked about before, you got some good coaches on the bottom of that bracket, with Calipari and Self. I think Texas Tech is a strong team. We know Maryland has got 5 really good players. They only have 5, but they're really good. You've got a red hot 12 seed in Colorado State, who's favored, as you mentioned. You've got the 2-time defending champs. So I'll go with the West.
Go with the West. Jim, did you take a look at the brackets for East and West?
I did, and I agree with Greg on this. That the West with St. John's in there as a 2, I mean, that is a really, really tough bracket to get out of. I mean, I don't. The East is very questionable, especially with Duke and the star player, the best player in the country. We're not knowing what his status or how he's going to be, if and when he comes back, is a major, makes it much, much easier to get out of there. So I would agree with the bottom being the East, the top being the West.
I agree. I make that 3 for 3. I agree with both of what you guys said. Florida, St. John's. I think they're 2 powerhouses that deserve to be where they are as far as the seedings were concerned, just that way. Andy, what are you thinking here as far as difficulty goes?
Oh, one of the things I use to measure the difficulty, not necessarily the overall bracket itself, as much as what are the likelihood, and I don't necessarily use odds or numbers, of the top 4 seeds having a chance to make it to the Final 4. So in the West, you've got Florida, clearly capable. You've got Purdue. Maryland in the West. I'm not so sure they can make a run at it, but they may be the best of the number 4 seeds, although I could argue with A&M and Arizona and the other regions. Certainly, I think Texas Tech is capable of making to the Final 4, and St. John's as well. So I would agree with the West as being the most difficult, and I'd probably go with the South as being right behind that, with Auburn, A&M, Iowa State, and Michigan State, with the caveat being the Iowa State injury. If Iowa State were fully healthy and they had the same seedings and everything, I'd probably pick the South over the West, simply because I think that Iowa State had a better. That Texas Tech had a better opportunity. That Iowa State would have had a better opportunity than Texas Tech in the West. But those are both clearly the best. The East, I probably, despite the presence of Duke, I'm not so sure I can make a better case for Arizona, Wisconsin, and Alabama, the 2, 3, and 4s, versus the Midwest of Kentucky, UCLA, and Tennessee. Might go with the East being the weakest of the 4.
So, okay, you've got the West and the South as the best, and obviously your softest would be either the East or the Midwest.
Yes.
Coming out of that, I agree with you, Andy. I think the softest bracket may well be the Midwest. You have Tennessee in there, who's a formidable basketball team, but are they a tad overrated? We'll see. They put up a lot of good statistical numbers, but they're still coached by Rick Barnes, and I think. I know he finds ways to lose money more than he does to win it. Now, I don't know about the basketball games, but the guy is a big-time money burner.
Is he the modern-day equivalent of Marvin Bad News Barnes?
Yes. Another good one, Andy. Yes, he is.
And Andy is sharp today.
Yes, he is. Sharp as a tack.
He is our private AI.
Yes, he is. That's why he's AI.
I've always said AI is artificial intelligence as opposed to NI, which is natural unintelligence, which is what AI is starting to become.
Yeah, it's becoming too popular in that sense. Speaking of which, I'm going to throw this little tidbit out there when I'm putting the newsletter or the guide together, and I'm scurrying through everything and not wanting to take the time to go look and research and everything. So I'll go in and I'll type into either Chat GPT or X has their own AI tool on there as well. And I found that when I typed in questions and asked them questions, they were wrong more often than they were right on some of these questions I was asking. So you have to be very, very careful about the specifics of what it is you're asking when you're using AI.
Well, maybe that makes them a good fade.
A good fade?
Fade, yeah. If they come up with a side, we can bet against them.
Well, that could well be.
By the way, Mark, I want to give a huge plug for the information in your March Madness guide. One of the things, and we sort of just alluded to it, you have, and I wish you were able to, probably don't have the time or resources to do it, the NCAA Super 16 coaches, because coaching is so important during the postseason, that to know how these teams fare. I know that you do it in the college and pro football, the Playbook annual with the records of the coaches in a wide variety of situations.
Well, thanks, Andy, because it's my feeling that one of the most valuable tools when it comes to handicapping any sport is the coaching. Probably more so in football, but basketball for sure. And we do list those top 16 coaches. There were actually a list of 22 coaches that I put together that I turned into our production manager, and I let him decide which of the 16 he wanted to use because there's a lot of experience as far as coaching is concerned inside this tournament here this year. And you find little nuggets in there. Rick Pitino's so good in Sweet 16 games and things like that. So it does go a long, long way, for listing stuff like that. Guys, let's talk about the Sweet 16. I just mentioned it. Anything that you might find that you're going to throw out there and surprise people with, and tell me who is your Sweet 16 surprise. Jim Feist, who do you see surprising and making it to the Sweet 16?
I'm very unhappy with BYU facing, and I know Greg feels the same way. We like these two teams, BYU facing VCU, the first matchup, because that means one of them can't move on. I like VCU. I think that they could be a long shot that could get into the 16 and make some and be very dangerous. The problem is I felt the same way about BYU. So one of them is going to go out, unfortunately, in the first round. But I'm going to stick with VCU winning, taking the points in this game and moving on to the 16.
Well, your caveat there, Jim, is you like VCU. If BYU trips them out, then they take their place. That's all. It's just simple, right?
Well, yes, except I don't have money on BYU.
They're gonna let you bet that way. Greg, who's your Sweet 16 surprise team in this year's NCAA tournament?
Let's see. There would be a couple, and one I wasn't really. I was going to wait and see, and sure enough, they were very impressive, and that was North Carolina. So I actually think North Carolina looks like a good bet, especially because they're a first four team, and we know how often first four teams make it to the Sweet 16. And of course, I've been high on Xavier since the end of the season, so. I think either Xavier or North Carolina could make a run to the Sweet 16. The other team, look, I know that there's going to be a lot of interesting people checking out this Colorado State-Memphis game because of what we talked about before. But and look, we're going to find out just how bad maybe the Mountain West was.
Oh God, I hope not.
Yeah, was that what it was? Was it the Mountain West was so bad that Colorado State just killed everybody, or was it that Colorado State has gotten hot at the right time? And let's keep in mind too that during this win streak, which I think is 10 straight up ATS, every single win has been by more than 8 points. So they are not just winning and covering; they are killing teams. So I still got to look at Colorado State as a potential team to keep an eye on there, making it to the Sweet 16. And then I guess the last one would be because we have to knock out 1 seeds. And if Duke is going to go down in a weak East, then I'm gonna look at possibly Baylor. They're very talented. They have underachieved this year. They've got a great coach. They've lost, I forget how many it is. They've lost a lot of games, a handful, at least 7 or 8 games this year, something like that, by, I don't know, 4 or less. But they've also won like 4 or 5 games by 5 or less. So they've been in a lot of close games. They've won their share. They've lost their share.
How did they do in their games? How did they do in their games against Houston? Because that's probably a good indicator as far as Duke is concerned, quality of team.
Yeah, I guess it depends on, I mean, like for instance, with Houston, we were looking at that BYU, how hot they were coming into the Houston game, and we're kind of surprised that BYU got destroyed. But we said at the time, well, it has to be a matchup thing. And then sure enough, I looked at the stats coming in here and realized, well, Houston is the 4th best 3-point team in the nation. BYU is about 260 in defensive 3-point percentage defense. Bad matchup. So in saying that, I don't know if the matchup situation would be different. I know in the second matchup, Houston played Baylor. It was I don't think either game was relatively close from what I remember. But so yeah. But the fact is that this is more of a takedown on Duke, and the flag is not 100%. And again, because it is a weak region. I always look at if a number 1 seed is going to go down, I always think to probably go down a little bit earlier, because the more they get on a run, the kind of harder it is to beat them. So I know it's a wild. Baylor could lose to Mississippi State in the first round, but that's just another team to keep an eye on.
Well, I agree with your thinking. I like the way you think, Greg. I know you're always looking for value, long shots, and so forth and whatnot, but you mentioned North Carolina, you mentioned Baylor. Both of those teams, by the way, happen to be ranked in the preseason AP top 10 and obviously underachieved this year. I think a lot of what North Carolina underachieved about was the ridiculous schedule that they took on before they went into conference play. It was horrible, and it really beat them up. But I do like your North Carolina play, and I think Baylor's worth a look. My other Sweet 16 sleeper would be Drake. I'm a little bit in love with the Bulldogs here right now. I like what they do. I call that McCollum from Drake, Rick Pitino 2, for the way he built this basketball team. And I think we're going to see a lot of noise being made by the Bulldogs here. Andy, who do you see in your Sweet 16?
Yeah, I did like Drake. My only concern for them is they would likely, if they get by Missouri, which I do expect to happen, they would have to face most likely a very good Texas Tech team, and I think that's where the quality of competition might be a little bit better. Because I mentioned Missouri. Yeah, they're really good at home, but they had difficulty. They had terrible road record. So, but I had it actually before last night's game, and I felt that whoever won between San Diego State and North Carolina would be able to defeat Ole Miss and make it to the weekend. Because with Iowa State and the injury, I don't think that whether it be now North Carolina or Mississippi, I think they would advance because they would defeat either Iowa State or Lipscomb. But with North Carolina, especially as impressive, they certainly played up to their talent level, maybe even exceeded it last night with the one-sided thing. Because remember, we talked at the very beginning, like one of my first comments was with the newsletter, that you had San Diego State, the best team in the field of 68 in field goal percentage defense, which obviously didn't come to anywhere close to being shown last night against Carolina, which may have a lot to say about North Carolina's ability when they're playing their best as they did last night. So that's Carolina is the team that I would have. I would also have, and I think again it's part of the region that they're in. I'm gonna, and it depends. I think St. Mary's gets by Vanderbilt and likely matches up against Alabama. And I think St. Mary's has the kind of defensive team that can frustrate Alabama, and Alabama has the kind of defense that could make a St. Mary's team look a lot better on offense than perhaps they really are. So I wouldn't be surprised if St. Mary's gets past the first 2 games. And I'll sort of take the tact that Greg was taking as far as the team that is most like the number 1 seed that is most likely to fall in the well, let's assume to get by the first round, but in the round of 32. And I'm going to take a look at the winner between Creighton and Louisville as perhaps knocking off Auburn. We remember Auburn being an early exit last year, losing to Yale. They have not ended the season as strongly as you would have liked to have seen them. That was my argument for not having them as the number 1 overall seed. And certainly I could have certainly agreed with Greg that they should have switched Auburn and Florida as far as the overall number 1s. At the same time, Creighton and Louisville relatively evenly matched teams, which means that these are 2 really good teams. I made the case for Louisville being improperly seeded. You could almost make a similar argument for Creighton. The point being that Creighton and Louisville are probably going to be involved in a competitive game where Auburn has a walkover, and thus, even though they might be tired, remember, these contests in the NCAA tournament are easier than the conference tournaments because you have the day of rest in between. So if Creighton and Louisville battle each other to the wire, whoever comes out of that, they'll have the 48 hours later to be prepared to take on an Auburn team that might have not been really challenged in their win against either, well, I guess now it's Alabama State, I guess it was, that came through last night. So I'll throw the winner of Creighton-Louisville as the surprise team to make it into the second weekend.
Wait, you mentioned Yale. If we go back to last year, Yale pulled off a pretty big upset.
Yep.
And
Auburn,
I've watched a couple of those games this year, especially the last one. They are very talented. Their outside shooting is amazing. They do crash the boards. They do rebound well. I can see them winning 1 or 2 games.
I think the problem that I have with Yale this year, if I recall correctly, and Greg, maybe you have followed it as well, or Mark, that last year, Yale, I think, played a very competitive non-conference schedule and had success against it. I don't think that was the same case this year for Yale.
That is true.
Well, they lost Danny Wolf. And Danny Wolf was their best player, and all you have to do is see how awesome he's been playing for Michigan lately and this whole season. I mean, there's not a better, more talented big man in the country than Wolf. Now, he's not a superstar, but he certainly doesn't play like a center. He doesn't play like a 7-footer. He's like the best 7-foot passer in the game. And so, you take that guy out of that Ivy League, out of that Yale lineup, and that's a big difference when you have to.
And the Ivy League was not as strong this year. We remember they were the last holdout team to go to a conference tournament, and they ended up saying, "Okay, we're an 8-team league. The top 4 will play on a Saturday and Sunday to decide it." For years and years, you could count on those 4 teams being Penn, Princeton, Yale, and Harvard. Well, this year, Penn and Harvard did not make it. It was Dartmouth and Cornell. Cornell's been a decent team. In fact, I believe Cornell was the last Ivy League team to make it into the Sweet 16, and I want to say that was around 2010 or something like that. So the league itself was down, and Yale dominated the league. They were 13-1, but again, it's that non-conference schedule, I think, that strengthened them last year. And as Greg pointed out, Michigan now has the best player from last year's Yale team.
And the other thing, too, is the matchup. And I know Auburn, good team. Nobody's trying to say they aren't. But Texas A&M, this is just I know they struggled a little bit towards the end of the season. They were able to correct things late.
At the end.
They went to the tournament last year. They lost to Houston in an overtime game in the second round, I believe. 6 of their players are back from that team. They're a very good rebounding team, which is the thing that Yale is. And so that kind of takes that away from Yale is A&M's ability to rebound, just like Yale. So I think it's a tough matchup for Yale. I think they could have done a little bit easier matchup. I might have gone their way, but because the matchup I don't think is very good, I'm going to stick with A&M.
I like them as well because, not for Sweet 16 necessarily, but to get by this first game because, as I just mentioned, the Ivy League was very weak this year, and Yale played half of its games, basically half of their games. Meanwhile, A&M played in certainly the statistically best conference where, when 14 teams make it, even if you say only 10 teams would make it from that conference. That's still a very difficult schedule that Texas A&M had to navigate to get in there. You mentioned the and also again the losses for Yale and the returners from Texas A&M. That's a significant difference. And I think I've heard it, and I've maintained this for years. When you come to betting a lot of these big underdogs, especially, maybe it's the first half you should look at, because ultimately the talent wears you down in the last 10 minutes of these games. And these teams, remember, they're very well prepared for the first half, so you don't have to worry about second half adjustments.
Well, bringing that up, there's a lot of people out here that I know that bet all of these games in the first half under. I don't know if you've heard that but it has been a winning formula. I mean, I know one person's going to bet every game under, and significant money. I mean, you can't get down too much money on it. You have to move around, shop a lot of places. But even if you bet $200, $300, $500 every under, they've been making money doing that.
Mark, it's like we've talked about last week, Missouri Valley Conference tournament. Just keep blindly playing the unders until, I don't know what the record is for the last 6-7 years, but it's got to be 60 to 70% unders.
Yeah, until they don't. Exactly right. Exactly. Hey, guys, let's go over to the Final Four now. We're getting closer and closer to cutting down the nets. So the big question I'm going to ask here is, who do you have in your Final Four, Greg DePalma, your Final Four teams?
All right, Final Four. We've got Michigan State, Florida. So that'll be on one side. And I've got Houston, and I'm going to go. I have to have a surprise team out of the East, and I'm still kind of going back and forth between, again, if I have Baylor beating Duke, then it's like Baylor, BYU, or St. Mary's. So one of those three teams I like. I just haven't decided yet which way I'm going to go. If I had to lean towards it today, I'd lean towards BYU. Because I think in that VCU game that we are a little bit worried about, Jim, the one thing that kind of my final reason why I'm going to stick with BYU is once again, like we've been talking a lot about these conferences. This is just not a very strong year in Atlantic 10, and BYU just played so well down the stretch, and they played beating some really good teams. And I just that when it comes down to that, and the other thing too is, remember we talked about BYU. If it wasn't for the fact that they don't match up well against three-point shooting teams, who knows what would have happened in the Houston game. But VCU is not a good three-point shooting team. So maybe that matchup with BYU might actually work out for them.
There you go. Greg DePalma's Final Four. Jim, have you given thought to your Final Four or what basketball teams you expect to see there?
The one team that I think is really, really dangerous is Florida. I like Florida. I like Houston. I think that's my championship game.
It can't be.
Jumping ahead. I know. I would like it to be. This is like wishful thinking, but I like Florida to get there to the Final Four. I'm going to go with Houston.
Okay.
To get to the Final Four, and I don't know what to pick out of the East. If I can't go with Duke, it's really hard. But I guess I have to go. I got to go with VCU, or if I can do that, I picked them in the 16. I got to give them another shot.
Sure, why not?
There.
Cinderella.
Cinderella. You got to have a Cinderella.
So who do you have in the South?
Auburn's.
We got Auburn and Michigan State as the top two seeds.
Well, I have to go with Michigan State because I'm really down on Auburn the way they ended the season, and I think they can get knocked off real. And if Auburn runs into a team that can hit some threes outside, I think they're going to be in trouble.
All right, so Jim's going to have Michigan State, Florida, VCU, Houston, and I agree with Jim. Actually, I actually just did a predict the champion matchup, and I did get 11-1 on Florida versus Houston. So
by the way, one thing to point out about Auburn. Remember what happened the year Purdue lost as a number 1 seed to a 16? What they did the following year?
Kicked ass.
The year they made it to the Final Four, if I remember.
Yes.
So,
well, that was in a 16 now, but it's the same kind of idea. So yeah. But anyway, yeah. What do you think about that bet, Jim? 11-1, Florida and Houston in the championship game. They don't have to win. All they have to do is get there.
I think I like it.
11-1 is outstanding considering you're talking about 2 number 1 seeds.
I love those two teams. I've talked
Yeah.
about it for months.
So there you go.
It's just now you don't have the depth of coaching with Florida because Calvin has been deeper more times than just about anybody. But that's other than the fact that the coach is young and doesn't have that kind of experience. Florida's a hell of a team. They can do it all.
Well, one thing, remember, he may not have the experience, but he got a lot of that experience this year playing in the SEC and coming out as they did.
You're right. Very right. Yes.
So, Andy, who makes your Final Four, Andy, this year?
I'm sort of chalky with one possible exception here. I do like Michigan State. I do like St. John's. So those are a pair of number 2 seeds. I do like Houston. That's the team that I've had since the start of the year. I think that this year, especially with what we talked about with the 3-point shooting, something that had not been a strength, that this is a better team this year. And of course, they had, as I mentioned, 30 wins or more the last 5 seasons. Samson's done a great job down there. And it's hard. Duke is the obvious choice in the in their region. Although, if they make it far enough, the one team that I think that could challenge Duke might be St. Mary's. That's a little bit of a long shot, but if they're able to win, 3 games to make it to the 4th? And the other team that I think has the talent but not the defense, Alabama, might present a nice challenge for Duke as well, even though I do have concern. Now, remember, a lot of their numbers defensively are the result of their fast-paced offense and putting up all those points. They led the nation in points. I believe they lead the tournament in points scored, but also in points allowed. The problem is sometimes they'll put up 70, they'll put up 85 or 90 and lose the game. But I think that talent-wise, Alabama has a chance to give Duke a challenge. But I'll stick with Duke.
So you have Duke, Houston, Michigan State, and St. John's.
Correct.
And I'll make my Final Four a little bit chalky, like Andy's as well. Not quite as much, but a pair of number 1s and a pair of number 2s. I've got Auburn surviving and making it there. I don't think they're going to go any further than that game, but I've got Auburn, St. John's, Alabama, and Houston.
Oh, Alabama.
Not a lot of talk about Alabama on this show here so far, guys. They are the leading scoring team in the nation. They're also the worst defense in the
That's probably why.
But, I keep hitting on and living with, because it serves so well. Alabama was the number 2 ranked team in the AP preseason top 25 this year, and they really didn't disappoint all that much. And I think they're a team that's kind of like being over slighted, if you will, per se, in that sense. So put me down for Auburn, St. John's, Alabama, and Houston.
I'd like to ask a question.
Sure.
Which of these teams that we all have selected for the Final Four or the final game is most dependent on the 3-point shot? Because that's the one you got to remember. The sight lines in these games is terrible, and if they're not hitting their threes and they're not good at going to the boards and getting rebounds, and they're not efficient at the 2-point shot, that is a real issue.
Well, that would be potentially Houston, but the thing with Houston is they
defense.
they're a very good all-around team. So I think if they had a bad shooting night, they still should be okay. But they're what, 4th, I think, in the nation. So I think they might be the best tournament team with the 3-point percentage.
They are.
And then so I think, but if under that question, it would have to be Houston, because I don't really see any other teams that are that good, because you're talking about the teams that we talked about in the Final Four. It would have to be Houston if you're just putting it into that question.
By the way, Houston is also outstanding in 3-point percentage defense. I think they're about 14th or 15th in the field, allowing slightly under 31% of opponent 3-point shots.
And so is Gonzaga, which could be an interesting matchup, especially because of the fact that Mark, I remember reading that, I think it was in the Coffee Club email, where Mark Few has never beaten a number 1 ranked team in the tournament.
Correct.
And then I was also looking over the newsletter. And if you look at the newsletter, there are a few things in there that actually Gonzaga is pretty experienced. Here it is. In the second round, just second round games, they've won 9 straight. So something has to come to an end if Gonzaga takes on Houston in round 2.
I have a few of the things that I point, and Mark, you may be the same way. I look at 3-point shooting, both offense and defense. I especially look at 3-point shooting. I also look at the team's ability to make free throws, especially when it comes to late game situations, and they're looking either to catch up if they're fouled, or in the more likely situation, extend the lead if they're fouled, trying to be, as they're up by 5 or 6 points in the final 2 minutes. So I look at that. And the other factor that I look at the turnovers lost. How well do they possess the basketball? How do they do that? And I take a look at rebounding, and especially rebounding margin versus the opponents. Somewhat offensive rebounding is important, but overall rebounding, I like to be on a team that has an edge over the opponent that they're facing.
Well, the best team that has the worst free throw percentage out of our Final Four teams is St. John's.
Yeah.
St. John's is like very close. I mean, they are really, really bad on the free throw line. They rank, I think, in the 280s out of 330, is it?
They rank 64th out of the 68 tournament teams.
There you go.
Wow.
So that could come down to hard St. John's. Alabama's not very good at the free throw line either. But again, and Mark does have him. But I think we have a couple of us have St. John's in there. So, yeah, that's the thing to keep an eye on.
All right, guys, let's walk it backwards now. Let's talk about cutting down the nets. This is what we're all in it for. Which team will be climbing the ladder? Andy, I'm going to go backwards with you. Who do you have winning the NCAA tournament?
I have Houston defeating St. John's.
Houston
in a game that the first team to 60 probably wins.
Good points. Good points. Jim, what do you see cutting down the nets?
Well, it's good that I have to do this, because if I start driving and I'm doing this, I'll probably crash. And I have to drive. I have Houston winning it all. I think it's Calvin Sampson's time to do it. He has more balance. He's got a little bit more help on the offensive end, which he's needed for a couple of years. Now he can shoot from the outside. Granted, but they can hit the boards. They play great defense. They've got all the tools and the experience. And Sampson's a very good, excellent coach. And I see them defeating Florida in the final game.
I like that. The Houston Cougars, Kelvin Sampson gets Jim Feist's vote. Greg DePalma, who do you have cutting down the nets this year?
Well, Jim and I have been doing too many college basketball videos together when we have the same two teams in the championship game.
I think you have it the other way, Greg.
I do. Yes.
Yeah.
I had, as you know, I took Florida, a month or so ago at 17-1. So feeling pretty good now that they're 3-1. To win the championship, but they're just getting better. Even after I took them, I didn't expect them to get this good. I figured they just get good at the tournament time, when the time was right. But they're playing just so well right now, and I got to go with Florida.
I think they've been the best team in the country since they. What did they end up losing to Tennessee by some big margin in midseason?
Yes, after they beat them by 30.
They lost by 20.
Then they lost by 20.
And I think they scored like 40-something points in that game, too, against Tennessee, the one they lost.
And by the way, they were also one of the better spread teams in the country. Very good against the spread. It's like, 24-8 or something like that?
Yeah, they definitely made a lot of people a lot of money.
All right, guys, my pick in the Final Four to cut down the nets, I'm with Andy as far as the pairing goes, Houston and St. John's, but I'll be on Rick Pitino to cut down the nets in this year's NCAA basketball tournament. Number one, it is his second year at the program, and it's well documented how well his teams do and improve in a second year of a program. We've seen that thus far this basketball season. There's not too many teams that are hotter right now than St. John's is, or playing better basketball than St. John's is. And I want to bring this point out. This is also another tidbit that's inside the NCAA Playbook March Madness Tournament Guide. I'm going to show this to everybody here. If you haven't got your hands on a copy of it, you might want to do that just in time for the tournament games this year. And inside inside the guide, we point out what we call the elite 7 elements. And these are factors that if teams check these boxes, they have won 20 of the last 22 NCAA basketball tournaments, teams from this list.
Actually, it's going to be 20 of 23, Mark.
20 of 23. Oh, why? It's not going to win this year?
Because Florida is going to win this year. So
okay, well, okay. Let me roll this back to you, Greg. When you turn it over, and ask you to rerun that question by me. What happened to Florida, Greg?
By the way, let me point out when you talk about free throw percentage and how bad St. John's is, 64th, I think I said, out of the 68 teams. Let's see.
Why is it worse?
No. Houston's. I'm talking about Houston. 68.7% for St. John's. Houston's free throw percentage is 74.1. That's 29 out of 68. Which means, again, if St. John's is nursing a small lead late in the game, as opposed to Houston, Houston is the team that is more likely to make their free throws, at least based on these overall numbers. We obvious situation on who's on the court at the time. I'll just tell you that Florida's numbers are pretty good. They're slightly below ours. Just under 72%. So better than St. John's, not as good as.
So what are the seven teams, Mark?
Yeah, well, these are the 7 elements that make up the list, and the teams that check each of these boxes make the list. There are 6 qualifying teams this year. Like I said, they've won 20 of the last 22 years. The only times they didn't win was UConn both times. UConn in that spectacular run they had, I think it was 2014, and then in 2023, UConn 2 years ago when they won the first of their back-to-back NCAA tournaments. But these are the 6 teams that are on the list this year. They happen to be Alabama, Auburn, Houston, Michigan State, St. John's, and Tennessee. Those are the teams that would be on this list if you're going to follow this list to make it to winning the NCAA basketball tournament.
Well, we know we can't include Tennessee because of the coach.
Well,
I'm just kidding.
I get you completely, Jim. I follow it. But, one of the criteria on this list about the coaches is the fact that, number one, the team's got to be from a 1, 2, or 3 seed from a major conference. But the coach has had 6 or more NCAA basketball appearances. And he's made it to the Elite 8 round at least once. So Rick Barnes slips through the cracks on that particular one. Okay?
He does, yes.
Yes, he does. So that's why he makes the list this season, this basketball season here. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Greg here right now to wrap up the show, close out the show. Greg, you want to go around the horn with some comments, thoughts, and whatever it is you want to share with the listeners out there, if you will.
Greg, can I go quickly because I have to?
Yes,
I have to start driving.
You can leave, Jim.
Well, I don't want to drive and do this. I'll have an accident.
No, we don't want we don't want that to happen. Anyway, well, Jim and I will definitely be back. Let's see. Well, tomorrow and Friday, of course, are going to be awesome days, and so will Saturday and Sunday. But Jim, when the next time you and I talk will probably be over the next several mornings. We'll have to get in our 2 cents every morning for the next several days, and then
absolutely,
yeah, and then hopefully
we're gonna have to talk about these other conferences as well because they're interesting. Even though they are money making, and a lot of those conferences the tournaments are being played on home courts, which makes the analysis a lot different than neutral courts.
Well, I think what people might want to know about those tournaments more than anything is that type of inside information, like, hey, well, is everybody going to be playing? Have some of the players decided not to play? And that could come into, I would think that would be a major reason why even some of these teams decided not even to enter these tournaments with the portal.
But once they win a game and they get it in their blood that they might win this damn thing, these kids like playing. So if they win one game, I think they become a little more interested.
All right, Jim. So you and I will probably talk again, I would guess, sometime maybe on Friday morning.
And what's the price on the team that's most disrespected right now in the whole world, UConn, to win it all? Andy, I know you know the number.
I'll see if I can find it in the next few minutes, and I believe I did bring it with me. Or
oh, you mean the championship futures?
The whole thing. Take down
That's
the
80.
Nets.
It's about 80.
80?
Where
Okay.
Jim said the most disrespected team? I would say North Carolina, as far as that goes. What are their odds,
Well,
and are they adjusted after last night?
150.
Well, that's what I meant. North Carolina.
150.
I thought you said UConn, didn't you?
Yeah, you said UConn.
Jim?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, UNC. Yeah.
Yeah, 150, Jim.
UConn's also
150.
being disrespected, which is why I mentioned it also.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
No, but I'm saying North Carolina because everybody, and they got West Virginia suing them and everything else. So I think it's great.
I think they'll be in the Sweet 16 too. Will North Carolina do?
And they're 18-1 to win the region. So
Amazing.
all right,
That
Jim.
was-
So
Take
we'll
care, guys.
I'll
Thank
see you
you.
on Friday.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay. I got to.
Best of luck, Jim.
After I do my show today, I got to go home and get that newsletter, Mark. I can't
Well,
wait to read it.
Stay up all night and soak it all up, Jim, because I'm sure it'll help you find an extra winner or two.
Well, unlike you, I don't have a dungeon. Greg's
Well-
always putting you into the dungeon. I need to find a dungeon.
All I can say is thank God for these video podcast lights because they light up my dungeon late at night. That's all I can say.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Have a good one, Jimmy. Be well.
All right, and Tony Mejia actually will be joining us hopefully here within the next few minutes. So we'll get we'll do like a look at Tony's picks and also a few more questions from some of these interesting seedings that everybody might want to take advantage of. But I don't know, one of the things that we always get at this time of year is just the game itself. And I don't know what they can do to change things. I guess, what I'm getting to is the slow pace of when you're watching a game and there's 5 minutes to go and you look at the clock and the game might have been on for, I don't know, 2 hours and they got 5 minutes to go and you're figuring, all right, I'll be out of here in 10 minutes. Well, you realize, you're there and it's 2 hours and 45 minutes later.
Yeah.
45 minutes later, you're still there. There was a game. I don't know if you guys remember. All right. So you're in it. It's 2 hours and 9 minutes into watching the game. There's a $1.42 left in the game. Okay. The game and the score was Vandy 71-62. The game ended 86-84 in regulation 34 minutes later. The final minute and 42 of the game took 34 minutes to end.
Well,
and I just couldn't believe what I was watching. And it was against another, relatively good team. Again, I just can't remember who it was.
that wasn't a football game, right?
Yeah.
No. So
I just chalked it up. It's an outlier. You play thousands of games each year, and you're going to have a few games that may end up going like that in the final couple of minutes with the.
Well, the
fouling
thing
and
that
the
I'm
timeouts and
alluding to,
everything.
though, Andy, is that these constant every 2-minute timeouts at the end of the games.
That's why
do
coaches
we
save them.
really need? I know, but do we really? But they shouldn't. Or if you want to have the timeouts, make them quicker.
Yeah.
Make them not where you ever see like when the whistle goes up, the horn sounds after the timeout. It still takes them like a minute to get on the damn court. It's got to be quicker, more. That's just me. Now,
Well,
maybe
I'll tell you part of the reason is real simple. Money, M-O-N-E-Y, additional commercials times that can air during these games. Because I'm sure there are a lot of complaints like that one that are heard all the time, and the networks or whoever broadcasting and selling the TV rights, they don't care. Because you know what? They know, especially in the late stages of a game, if you're watching that game, you're going to stay to the end most part of it. And they also realize that so much of the audience of watching any game these days, they got money on it.
All right, now taking a look at some of because I'm going to wait on asking some of these questions until Tony comes in here because he should be here in a minute. But taking a look at some of the Coffee Club tidbits.
Oh, by the way, let me just mention one thing because it's important that Mark put together that coaching study. There is one coach in the tournament, 14-4 straight up, 15-3 against the spread. Now you probably know who it is because they've just won back-to-back tournaments. Okay. In Danny Hurley.
yes.
However, those are only 12 games. So you look at his record in those other, the other 6 games that he played over a couple of tournaments before he went to UConn. That's an outstanding record. As far as other coaches that you have in there who have been very strong, Izzo has a winning record overall over 80-something games, and Patino, as you might expect, also has a winning record, and he's played, I think, almost 70 games, and they're both like 10 games above 500 against the spread.
Yeah, Patino also, like I mentioned before, Sweet 16 round, he's 11-1 straight up and 10-2 to the spread. It's a pretty healthy number.
Okay, so there was in the recent coffee club, there's actually a couple of tidbits here. One is, let's see, we have Gary from Brooklyn wants to know, what is the best time of year for being a sports fan? March to April. You got the NCAA tournament, the NFL draft, NBA and NHL playoffs.
Masters.
Also Major League Baseball spring training. And he didn't even mention the Masters. Yes. Meanwhile, you go against, if you're going to go compete with, I guess, the fall, the winter in October through December, you've got the playoffs in baseball and NFL, NBA, NHL, college football is going on, NFL college playoff season. So anyway, Mark says, look out the window, Gary, you're looking at it. March Madness with the NFL draft and the NBA and NHL players on deck is a sports lover's dream. What do you think, Andy? What is your favorite time of year?
I agree, because you have those two unique events, the Masters and the NCAA tournament, that are once-a-year events, and for a relatively short period of time. One is 4 days, the other is 3 weeks. And you add that in, of course, with the NFL playoffs, Super Bowl, etc., the start of baseball, the approaching of the playoff time for the winter sports. You've got so much going on at one time, and of course, you're just starting to look ahead to the start of the baseball season.
It's well, the NFL draft in there too, Andy.
Yeah, that's right, NFL draft.
Right.
I was reading, there was an article, one of the articles on The Athletic, they're talking about Cooper Flagg and the whole thing about whether or not he's thinking of coming back. And so there was this story about it, and what I found interesting was reading the story is that the person who was reading the story doesn't really believe that he's really considering this. And he was almost coming around to almost be like, well, of course he shouldn't consider it. Look how much money he's leaving on the table. So whereas if I am like writing the story, I'm like, it's like pro that a boy, Cooper. That's excellent. That'd be great for the game. More kids would decide to do it, making college basketball a better product, and eventually making the NBA a better product. The thing I don't understand from some of these writers is when they don't talk like that. It's like they talk like they don't get the fact. Like all they're thinking about is, well, look at the money. Look at the money he's leaving out. The money's the most important thing. You should take the money and run. The best sports writers should be guys who love sports and want nothing but the best for sports. And what would be the best for sports, Mark, would be for Cooper Flagg to decide to come back.
No question. No question. He will be college basketball. I mean, what an awesome freshman season that he's had. I'm sure that he can make ukus and big money and so forth and whatnot moving forward.
Especially now with NIL so prevalent. He can get as much. He will get, and there are players already in college who get more than a number of players in the NBA who have been, 4 or 5 year veterans.
And there are also players in college, Andy, that will get more from the NIL than they would by going pro.
Yeah.
So, the decision becomes easy. Take it now, take it here when it's more, and maybe improve your stock along the way.
And a lot of these kids also, their parents or their agents have insurance policies against, let's say, significant injuries that might hamper or entirely eliminate the potential for a pro career. So they're guaranteed to get a bunch anyway. And again, the atmosphere in college basketball, college football, you're not going to get that once you turn pro.
Andy, great business idea here. NIL insurance company. That could be a moneymaker.
Let's all pool our resources.
Yes,
we can insure one player for one half of one game.
That we can. Yes.
All right, so let's just wrap up here with some of these questions I want you guys to answer here regarding the tournament and some of the things that have taken place over the years that could make it interesting. because we see these trends happening every year. Mark obviously has a bunch of them that you'll be able to purchase in the newsletter. And there are some others too that could help you to fill out your brackets. For instance, a 2 versus a 15 seed. A 15 seed has upset a 2 seed in 3 of the last 4 tournaments. Now, it was 3 for 3 until last year. Princeton did it against Arizona in 2023. St. Peter's upset Connecticut in 2022. And Oral Roberts upset Ohio State in 2021. This year,
I think it's only 2 times that a 15 has not beat a 2, going back the last 12 or 14 years. It's in the guide, but it's very seldom it doesn't happen.
So, and I looked at this year's bracket, and I don't really think these 15 seeds look very capable of beating a 2 seed this year.
They rarely do, though.
Yeah. So again, considering it happened recently and it went on a little run, if you had to pick a 15 seed to pull off the upset, I mean, would it be Wofford because they're playing Tennessee? I mean, who would it be?
Because they're playing Rick Barnes, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. That could well be. Wofford could be the guy.
Yeah.
Well, that would almost make either Tennessee or Alabama the weakest of the 4 number 2 seeds. I think Michigan State and St. John's, and there again, we have veteran coaches who've won it before that are acclaimed as Hall of Fame coaches. In fact, I think they're both in the Hall of Fame and have been for a number of years. So you take a look at Rick Barnes in Tennessee, and you take a look at Oates at Alabama. I would have to say Wofford on that basis would be the most likely team. Bryant's a very nice team. They're coached by the son of Phil Martelli, who had that great run with St. Joe's for many years. Nebraska Omaha has some numbers, but they don't really have a great amount of experience, and they're going up against one of the most experienced coaches and a very talented. Remember, you mentioned it, Mark. No returning starters on St. John's, and look what they did this year. Okay, even with the bad free throw shooting. So I'd have to say, is it between Robert Morris? The reason that, maybe I would think Robert Morris only because Alabama plays such bad defense, and if Robert Morris has a good shooting night, they might be able to exploit that. We don't know what Alabama would be, but I would say, if you're talking about coaches, Rick Barnes is not going to be on the list of the coaches that you would want to back. I agree, and of course we said it. It doesn't happen very often. But I would think probably Wofford would have the best chance, followed by Robert Morris. I'd be shocked if Nebraska, Omaha, or Bryant would pull the upset.
At least one double-digit seed has advanced to the Sweet 16 in 37 of the last 39 years. After NC State advanced all the way to the Final Four last year as an 11 seed. Princeton, by the way, was a 15 seed that advanced to the Sweet 16 in 2023. So again, just going on those double-digit seeds. In the Sweet 16. Do you have a specific double-digit seed, Mark?
Well, I would think you have to pay attention to UC San Diego. This basketball team has been smoking hot. In fact, I think they're the hottest team in the country coming into the tournament. Not a lot of experience here, obviously, but they're playing as good as anybody. And I think they get an opportune draw in this first matchup here against Michigan, who surprised in the Big Ten Conference, and the Big Ten has not shown well. The Big Ten champion has not shown well in their first tournament game afterwards. There, I could see a letdown for Michigan, and if the Tritons in Indy, were they not called the Torios at one time, but the UC San Diego?
I believe so. Although I'm wondering if that might have been San Diego U. Not sure what San Diego U's.
San Diego's
the Toreros.
San Diego's the Toreros. UCSD are the Tritons. They're 2 different schools.
Yeah.
Okay. They'd be the guy that the double-digit seed that I would not be surprised.
Yeah, the one thing that's going to be interesting in that matchup with UC San Diego and Michigan is that I think their tallest player is 6'8", and they have like one guy maybe or 2 at 6'8", and Michigan, of course, has a couple of guys at 7 foot, 7'1", and so, but they put these matchups sometimes. They know what they're doing. It's a really good matchup. But
you can't fault the committee for not having a sense of humor.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people who think that if San Diego can get by Michigan, then who knows? Maybe they could be one of those Cinderella teams.
Well, that Xavier Texas winner can also advance. The 11 seeds have done really well out of the first 4 games after winning the first game and moving forward within the tournament. they're going to catch a spotty Illinois basketball team who's been known to streak.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, by the way, that in the earlier segment, I think it was myself, Mark, and Greg all had North Carolina in the Sweet 16.
There you go.
There you go. Answered our
11th
question
seed.
already. The 11th seed,
Another
North
11th
Carolina.
Seed. Yep.
Yeah.
There you go.
How about you, Tony? Double-digit seed to make the Sweet 16.
Utah State, I like them over UCLA. If there's
Utah
if Tennessee
State
is vulnerable, I could see Utah State getting into that Sweet 16. Let's see who else. UC San Diego, I do like them over Michigan, so certainly they could be in that Sweet 16 as well.
So who's your best option? Utah State, Arkansas, or UC San Diego?
UC San Diego.
Okay.
I really like them, and I think they got a good bracket, a good portion of the bracket to get out of. I think Michigan is certainly vulnerable because, as you guys mentioned, they are going to be at a size deficiency, and certainly Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden are quality bigs, but they struggle to score sometimes, especially from the perimeter. They were on the ropes a couple of times in that Big Ten tournament, even before the final against Wisconsin, and it is because their guards tend to shoot poorly. So it's a really good matchup if you see San Diego, which limits turnovers and really fundamentally sound. If they notch that upset, it's Texas A&M is going to be tough. So is Yale, depending on who gets out of that matchup. But I think UC San Diego is going to open a lot of eyes.
Tony, are you concerned that the only game or the only win that UC San Diego has this year over a team in the field, I believe, Mark, you have that information, is I think a 2-point win over Utah State? The quality of competition that they faced in their conference compared to the night in, night out competition faced by Michigan.
That would be something that I think would definitely concern me if they weren't as consistent as they have been with the teams that are in front of them. Again, I mentioned this when we were talking Big West tournament, that it's been noted by other people how this team gets up for whoever it is that's on the schedule, and there have been no letdowns. So spread-wise, they've been a darling in terms of cashing tickets, simply because they treat everybody with respect and go out and annihilate.
I'm just thinking in terms that the competition they faced in the Big West, similar talent levels in many respects, and now they're going up against a team that comes from a conference that is playing elite talent night in and night out and has some elite talent of their own.
Look,
the line's very short, just like a lot of people thought last night.
Sure, they were fighting an uphill battle to start. I think their first game of the season was against San Diego State, and they lost. Yes. But they were in that game, and I think that they will have some obstacles in front of them against Michigan with two quality 7-footers. Especially Wolf is essentially their point guard at times, so that'll be a new challenge. But Michigan's going to have to adjust as well to a team that really attacks you with all 5 options. So
and is very careful with the basketball on offense.
Executes extremely well with minimal miscues that lead to points. I mean, we won't see many pick sixes, as they like to say in basketball, with steals and layups.
Okay, so before we get your official Final Four picks, Tony, and this question also can go around the horn anyway. A 7 seed or lower, meaning 7, 8, 9, 10 seeds, etc., has reached the Final Four in 10 of the last 11 tournaments, with 13 making it in the last 13 years, including 11 seed NC State last year. So give me a 7 seed or lower to make the Final Four. We'll start with Andy. I'll let Andy go. I'll let Tony go last so he can have time to look it over. So Andy, you go first.
Well, I said that to make the Final Four, you're going to have to win 3 games and then win your regional final. And I said before, I remember when I picked my Final Four team, I did say, though it may be an unlikely situation, if St. Mary's is able to win their first 3 games because of their style of play, it could frustrate Duke. That would be the one team that I thought would be a surprise. I suppose the other one, and again, it's based on talent and where they are seated, but historically, And this is the team I think that was #1 in Blue Ribbon Yearbook starting the year, and that's the Kansas Jayhawks. They have they're going to be very fortunate to make it out of the first weekend because they'll have to get by Arkansas and most likely St. John's. But I think that if they are able to do it and get past the first weekend, they have a shot. And I guess because we're all, or at least several of us, have North Carolina in the Sweet 16, there's a chance another because of their talent and their pedigree that they have an opportunity based on talent. I mean, they're not. I can't see them playing a game the rest of the tournament as well as they played last night, but they may not have to play that well.
Yeah, that 11 seed will just. I mean, that actually is one that might work out for the fact that an 11 seed is advanced to the Sweet 16 in 9 of the last 10 tournaments, with 4 advancing to the Elite 8 and 3 to the Final 4.
Yep.
So we'll stick with that 11 seed North Carolina, and again maybe Xavier, if Xavier can beat Texas, as interesting 11 seeds. Mark, a 7 seed or lower, making it to the Final 4.
Well, you can take a look at this 2 ways. Are you going to look at a team that is from a mid-major and is going to surprise everybody, come in and steal the show per se, or you can look at a pedigree team that's been there before and done that, and maybe underperformed a little bit this year. And once the bell sounds in the March Madness tournament here, they come alive. And I'm going to vote for the latter, the teams that have been there before with the pedigree. And I will put 3 teams, namely, on that list. Number 1, Kansas, as you mentioned. They were the AP #1 preseason team, all the experience that Bill Self has in this Kansas basketball team. And I think that they will want to make a statement in this tournament for the poor results they've had this year. The other would be, why not the double defending champion UConn Huskies, who I made the case before early, how well they perform out of the gate as defending champions in the first round, 5-0, average win 31 points a game. They get out of that first round game and they move forward. Who knows what can happen? And my third choice would be North Carolina, the team that was slighted and took it out big time in their first 4 route, if you will, per se. So those would be the 3 teams I'd pencil in as potential upsets to make it to the Final 4. And
if you had to pick one of the 3, who would it be?
If I had to pick one of the 3, I'm going to say Kansas.
Okay.
I'm going to say Kansas. I would have liked to say North Carolina, but and I know they beat themselves up with that early schedule that they had, and they've got a lot of motivation to play right now. But I'm going to say Kansas. There's a lot of talent on that basketball team, and I don't think we've seen the best of it yet.
Is UConn?
This is the time of the year when that early season tough schedule, like we've seen Louisville play over the years, Michigan State play over the years, it's in this tournament time, especially well-coached teams, veteran-coached teams. This is when all that early season, quote-unquote, struggles pays off.
Exactly right. Exactly.
Is UConn considered a blue blood?
I would think right now they are, Tony. Would you call them a blue blood in the basketball world?
They absolutely are, but I don't know that they're considered that.
Yeah.
But yes, they are. They are. But I think the blue bloods are Carolina, Kansas, Duke.
Yeah, that's why I was looking at Mark's.
No longer UCLA and Kentucky, who had been for many,
but
many years.
UCLA, Kentucky, historically. But I would put UConn in there, especially with the back-to-back championships.
Yeah.
Giving them what I believe is
if you
5.
look over the past, let's say 10 years or 15 years, you would certainly have to. Villanova for a little bit was, but not really, because they were basically short run. But these other teams have been consistently, let's say, Sweet 16s, 60% of the time or more.
If there was an addendum to the quote-unquote blue bloods entering 2010, UConn would be number 1 on that list to be added.
Yes, absolutely. And Florida might not be far behind. They'd be on the list somewhere.
All right, Tony.
2005.
Greg, because I know you're coming to me on this. Did we properly destroy the committee for letting UNC even in this?
Oh, say that again?
Did we properly destroy the committee for letting UNC?
Not on this show. No.
Okay.
Jim and I did on our Sunday night show.
Give me 1 minute just to say that. And mind you, I watched last night. I said Sunday. I said I don't care if UConn gets hot. I mean, if UNC gets hot and makes the Sweet 16, which is entirely possible, and expected them to beat San Diego State last time. They do not belong in this tournament.
Yes.
Corrupt. Absolutely corrupt.
That's true.
Bubba Cunningham on his way out. And I had a friend of mine who's a huge Carolina homer go at me on Twitter yesterday and say, see. I said, look, man, I know you're just defending your team, He's like, well, what about a couple of years ago? You're telling me that Bubba didn't defend him then? No, he didn't, because he still had tenure to continue going forward. This is him on his way out. I saw them defend the decision on the actual show, saying, "Oh, they were the last team in."
Yeah.
And if
What does that have
UAB
to do with anything?
if UAB had beaten Memphis, they'd be out. No, they wouldn't. San Diego State would have been out. But I digress. Carolina, absolutely, very talented. They had chance after chance after chance.
Sure.
They got Duke in the ACC tournament, minus 2 key cogs, including Cooper Flag, and couldn't seal the deal there. Should not be in this tournament. That said, not surprising to see them win yesterday,
Yeah.
and I could see them beat Ole Miss, no problem. We'll see how healthy Iowa State ends up being after this Lipscomb game, because they could win that game as well. But I have Iowa State getting out of that portion of the bracket. So to answer your question, my choice would be UConn, because I could definitely see them coming out of the Oklahoma, Florida portion of that of the West region. Look, UConn, absolutely not the team that they have been over the past couple of years, simply because Stephon Castle is in the NBA right now.
Or how can you be, Tony? How can you sustain like that?
Exactly. Klingon's in the NBA.
Just like the Chiefs in the Super Bowl.
Huge part of that team to have a rim protector like that to go to anchor your defense. And only recently is Taryn Reed and Solomon Johnson stepping up and avoiding foul trouble and being consistent to give Danny Hurley what he needs as the back line of that defense. Caravan is the only guy that's been a factor on all 3 teams, the 2 championship teams, and this one going into this NCAA tournament. But I do like Salo Ball. He's a solid guard. If he gets hot, he can carry a team for stretches. Caravan is an X factor, because if he's shooting the ball well, he's also capable of really taking UConn to another level. And obviously their best player on paper and their best prospect coming into the season is the freshman McNeely, who had injury issues for well over a month. They brought him back in. No coincidence that they've been at their best over the last month. So they can carry that forward. Do I think they'll win a 3rd straight championship? No. Could I see them get hot at the right time and make the Final Four? Yeah, especially as this question is phrased, seeding wise, they're the most dangerous 8 or above.
Yeah, we actually, matter of fact, Jim was bringing that up regarding the whole thing about North Carolina. Maybe we were wrong. And then I said exactly that to him. The point was that debate ends at that time. When the tournament begins, anything can happen. Just like you said, Tony. And we're all saying, hey, yeah, we're all kind of agreed North Carolina shouldn't be here, but we're all saying, hey, sure, we should possibly put some money on them to advance and go. So we don't have any bias. Once they're in, they're in. It's a completely different story. What I also could not stand was the fact who's the main guy on that show now?
Adam Zucker. See the one
No.
who took over for
Zucker,
not the host, the
analyst. I think you're talking about Seth Davis.
Yes. So
yeah.
He talked. Did you get him telling everybody and comparing North Carolina to Indiana?
Yes.
Look,
I'm going to find that out. He never asked the question the way he brought it up to the audience. But as soon as that guy came on the screen, it was like he's the president of the United States, and I'm going to give him all the respect in the world, and I'm not going to ask him any tough questions.
Are you talking about Skip Bayless?
No.
Absolutely terrible.
During the selection show.
The selection show on CBS. It was
Well,
awful.
and what was the question you were thinking of that you would have liked to ask? Because
he was talking about how Indiana's won 5 games against Quad 1 teams. North Carolina's got 1 win. We all know that.
Yep.
So it should be Indiana, not North Carolina. I will ask. We'll go find out when the committee's on.
Yeah.
He has the committee guy right there.
I was waiting him to ask the same question. Why would you not have chosen Indiana over North Carolina when Indiana clearly has the superior resume?
Yeah.
It was awesome, the deflection.
And by the way, and plays in a better conference this year.
But Bubba Cunningham saying, "Well, I was out of the room, so I don't know." And his cohort took over and said, and his entire lining of defense was, "Well, if UAB had beat Memphis, Carolina wouldn't have been out." So they completely deflected on the question. Look, Indiana should have been in the tournament ahead of North Carolina, and I did the bracketology thing at CBS. That was one of the first things I did at Sportsline on the come up, and I did it for a few years. So and this was back in the day when it was a lot. The RPI was still involved, when seeding implications meant that conference teams couldn't play one another until I believe it was
Regional
the Elite
finals.
Eight. Yeah. So the fact of the matter is, it's a lot easier now, and it almost has to be because you get 14 teams in a conference. It's hard to even see that
it's
way.
impossible.
But
Yeah.
but the point is, I know what I'm talking about with this. To get and the bracket matrix, to get over 100 bracketologists to agree that West Virginia should be in the tournament, and they're left out of this tournament. Come on now.
Well, but do you heard why though? Because DeVries, who was
DeVries
injured
has
in
been out since
November,
January.
Yeah.
Come on.
That's the stupidest thing. Yes.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that's
The problem with the committee, and when you ask the chairman, every year this is the case. They didn't do it because they didn't ask that many questions this year. Is they can always use criterion A to justify when one team is eliminated and the other one is put in, and then when they'll use criterion number 2 for explaining why a second team was put in, and there's no consistency because when they talk about the second team, they met the criterion of the first team. So they can use any number of justifications regardless of the obvious inconsistencies in their application.
Yeah, and look, I'm all for it. You know what? Let's reward these teams that play these games that are made for TV or made to improve your resume. You won one game out of all of them. That's awful.
And do you guys, because I really didn't, I would have answered this question differently a few years ago, the question of more teams. But now, after seeing what's been going on in the parity and the transfer portal and everything's changing, there's just no doubt that, you know what, go ahead, add a few more teams. I don't even care if you had 10 more, because there are teams that are not in this tournament now that could easily make the same type of run that North Carolina did or NC State last year. So just let them in.
How about we eliminate the conference tournaments entirely, let the entire eligible field of, I don't know how many of the 364 teams would be on probation. It would add maybe 1 or 2 games to the tournament. You'd have probably about 100 teams that would get buys in the first round. And that way you can't say, if you eliminate the conference tournaments, that means you're eliminating as many as 4 games that a team would play. So you can't use the argument, well, they'll be playing more games. Not if you eliminate the weekend of the conference tournaments. And then you just open it up to everybody. Then the only arguments will be about the seeding and the matchups, but not whether a team should be included.
The fact that Wisconsin is seated below Michigan and other teams that they beat in the Big Ten tournament just tells you that, like,
look at Louisville and Clemson.
But these were already
that's a 5 and an 8.
Predetermined.
And Louisville just beat them.
Predetermined.
Okay, so one of the last ones here, and I'm going to get your predictions, Tony. The last time a 4 seed or lower won the national championship was in 1997. That was when Arizona won as a 4 seed. As crazy as that sounds, 1997, the last time a 4 seed or lower won the national championship. So give us your 4 seed or lower to win the national championship, Mark.
When you say lower, you're talking about worse than a 4 seed? Okay, because numerically, something worse than a 4 would be a 1, 2, or a 3.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I would say, let me look at my tournament bracket here. I didn't even actually think about this question, but it is a good question.
You don't have any in your Final Four, so
I don't know. And I've learned along the years it's not wise to look at those types of teams because you just burn money and they don't make them.
Well, how about your 7 seeds or lower to make the Final Four? You have Connecticut. Connecticut. You have Kansas as the team that you like the most. Can you see them winning the national championship?
Well, if they make it to the Final Four, it's like the San Francisco Giants in the Major League Baseball playoffs. When they get there, anything can happen.
Yeah.
Even though they're almost never the best team.
Yeah.
So anybody who makes it to the Final Four, as you say, anything can happen. So put me down for the Kansas.
I'll tell you real easy. I'll say Connecticut if they get on the run as a number 8 seed. Means they would have had to eliminate Florida early on.
There you go.
Tony?
Mine is in that same area, but it's Maryland. And maybe it's because you kind of eliminates Florida. Florida, as everybody's saying correctly, has been the best team in college basketball for the last 6 weeks. And they just got hand loaded back, which makes them even more formidable to get a 7-footer that's only going to rebound out there and not get in the way. Nobody beats them in terms of quality size, and they have a lot of great guards. Clayton being the best one of them. So certainly Florida and what they did in the SEC tournament, not hiding from anybody, but they did get a tough draw. UConn's going to be formidable, and then my answer to this question would be Maryland. Again, they need Queen and Reese to stay out of foul trouble, but those are two very good big men that have done it consistently night in, night out. They've got good guard play with Gillespie and Manuel, guys who have been at other schools. So this is a veteran team outside of the freshman Derek Queen, who needs to lose some of the baby fat, but is a legitimate top 10 NBA draft pick.
And then the final one is give us a Cinderella. Give us a team that could do something like FAU.
By the way, who did Mark answer this question with?
Kansas.
Oh, Kansas. Okay. Yeah.
Give us a Cinderella.
By the way, Greg, did you give us an answer?
For the 7 seed or lower,
to win at all? Yeah.
I had let's see, I've had to pick one of these. I've got several down here. Tell you the truth, I might actually just go with North Carolina.
Okay, reasonable.
So, yeah,
they have the talent.
Yeah, I've got a few on here, but that one does seem to stick out. All right, so give us a Cinderella. You got FAU in 2023, Loyola Chicago in 2018, and so on. And again, it could be anything, but, I think everybody kind of gets the gist of what a true Cinderella team could be. And this is only to advance to the Final Four, no national championship. So give us some really dark horse type of team that could make one of those dramatic runs.
What seed, were you using a seed on this or just any team
no,
at all?
No seed, any team. Pick any team you like.
Okay.
Yep, any team. That can be what you would classify yourself as a Cinderella. And whoever wants to go first, go first.
Well, I would like to throw Drake out there in the mix. Go ahead, Tony.
I'll start. I think that the most winnable portion of a region is the bottom portion of the Midwest region. And I could see Illinois making a Final Four run because certainly from a talent standpoint, they're the most talented team in that region, even more so than Tennessee. Tennessee is just sounder defensively, but Illinois, a hot Illinois team could beat anybody in the country. That being said, I'll also preface this by saying that I think we've seen the end of true Cinderellas because of the transfer portal. Last year, we saw less upsets. I think that's going to continue to factor in simply because the depth that was created for Cinderellas as recently as FAU no longer is the case. Those guys transfer out and create more depth for the larger schools that are paying them. So my choice will be 10-seeded Utah State. I could see Utah State beating UCLA. I can see Utah State upsetting Tennessee, and that Illinois-Kentucky portion of the bracket, Kentucky comes in banged up, less than 100% than what they would have been, and Illinois as inconsistent a team in this tournament in terms of get hot, they can beat anybody. As they hung 100 on Iowa in the Big Ten tournament, come back the next day and get absolutely destroyed by Maryland. That's Illinois this year. And I could see them coming out of the Midwest, or I could see Utah State beating them in a potential regional semi that nobody sees coming and then making that run. So Utah State would be my Cinderella.
Okay. And I'm going to speak for Jim because I already know Jim's Cinderella would be VCU. So Mark, Andy, you want to go? Were you going towards Drake?
Well, I was going to mention two teams. To me, a Cinderella is largely made up from a mid-major conference, only because they don't get the exposure, the credibility, or they're not in the limelight. But if I use that as a part of my criteria, one team would be Drake, a 30-win basketball team who didn't make many mistakes at all this year. And under this new head coach who went out and raided the portal to build this basketball team, I think they're credible. And the other might be UC San Diego, a basketball team that's probably playing better or hotter than any team in the nation right now. So either one of those two, UC San Diego or Drake.
Andy?
Well, I'm going to go with a team. I'll go with a couple of them, but the one that I'll go with as far as a it's a quality team that has not had much success. I think the draw is capable. They might be able to beat Houston. I'll go with Clemson as far as a possible team that could make the Final Four if Houston indeed is vulnerable. I don't expect it to happen. I would like to say if you're looking along the type of teams that have made it as true Cinderellas, I would agree with Mark and I would go with Drake.
Okay. And I would agree with Mark too, but with UC San Diego, even though if I had to pick the game, I'd pick Michigan. But I think UC San Diego has more than enough. I think either one of those teams actually can make the Sweet 16 and maybe go further. But the other team is going to be Troy. I'm going to go with Troy. I think they might be a sneaky good team out of the Sun Belt. They beat a pretty good Arkansas State team that had played pretty good out of conference. And that was a nice win. They're playing good ball. And there's some good things to like about Troy. So that'll be my one of my two Cinderellas. All right.
Are you pulling the trigger on Troy over Kentucky?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, before you get your picks, Tony, does anybody have any big upsets in round one that you'd like to share? I know you're going to have to keep some of them for your own picks behind the wall, but if anybody has as an upset or two, I'll
throw out Drake over Missouri.
What's the line? 6? I think so, right?
In front of me now, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the line is something like 6. Okay, so Drake over Missouri, so that would be a good one. Do you have any? I mean, I'll
throw another one out there. I'll throw out Georgia over Gonzaga plus the points.
Okay, that's also 6. All right. Anybody have anything else?
Well, I'll throw a major upset out there from our tournament guide. It was our upset game this first round, and that might be McNeese State over Clemson.
Okay.
Basketball team last year that I said the same thing about, and they got drilled.
And they embarrassed you, yes.
Yes. They remember that. And
they're gonna give it back.
A little bit of redemption here, yes, for McNeese State.
Okay. I have a few. I'm going to go with, well, obviously Troy is going to be one of them. I'm also going to go with, and you touched on it, you mentioned them, Tony. I don't know why you did, but you did mention their name, and I'm going to go with Lipscomb. I'm going to go with Lipscomb because obviously Iowa State's got one of their players out, and let's keep in mind that Iowa State has lost twice recently in the last month of the season as a double-digit favorite.
They have not played well at all since probably mid-February.
Yeah, they've been banged up.
Yep. So I think Lipscomb,
now they're even more.
They're 8-1 in the money line in that one. I also think that Maryland could be vulnerable. Not that we know how talented they are, but Grand Canyon is obviously well coached. They've got they're a good fundamental team. They got good size, and they're almost 5-1 on the money line. And then the other one would be High Point against Purdue. They're a 3-1 pick in that one, getting 8 points. So those would be my upsets in the first round. Tony, do you have any, or are you going to keep those behind the wall?
I mean, the one I've already mentioned is the one I'll go back to, and it's now 2.5. But I think UC San Diego beats Michigan. So I mean, I'm not reinventing the wheel here. It's funny though, it's 2.5, especially since 96% of people, unless you got ESPN Plus, have not seen UC San Diego play at all.
Right.
Yeah. But just, I mean, like the fact is that just watch them play. It's like, wow, that's a pretty good basketball team. They've got positional size. This is going to be a very telling opponent, though, because few teams are built like this Michigan team. They just the guards don't shoot well. So
Michigan better not overlook this team. Is basically what
they won't. They can't.
Oh yeah, no,
they can't. And not to mention their coaches are coming from a Cinderella.
Yeah.
So you're preaching to the choir on that one. But legitimately, UC San Diego can beat Michigan. They just have to rebound as a team.
Okay, Tony, give us your Final Four. Who do you have in the Final Four?
Believe it or not, I haven't done this, so I'm going to do it on the fly just for the show. In the South, I will ride Auburn. Just looking at, I think from the number 1 seeds, they have the best region, the most manageable region.
Mark Osel has Auburn.
Not many trouble spots there along the way. I mean, Louisville could give them issues if Louisville, and that might be it. In the West, I will go with a surprise. So, man, it's hard to resist the urge to ride St. John's because that's the one team that I'll be rooting for. But just to be somewhat different, let's go with Texas Tech.
Okay.
And I haven't mentioned
Texas
them
Tech.
at all, but their depth is legit.
I could see that very easily.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have Texas Tech in the Sweet 16.
They're a really good basketball team.
All right.
I will go with the Midwest, and again, we'll go Houston, but at the same time, for the sake of fun, let me go with Illinois.
Illinois. Wow.
So
Okay.
which one should we mark down?
Illinois.
If we're doing this legitimately, hey, you were right, Houston.
Okay.
But I'll X factor Illinois there.
Well, let me
Illinois,
just put
Utah State.
Illinois for a 6 seed. So let me just put Illinois because you didn't put them in. You said Maryland so let me put them Maryland and Illinois as 4 seeds or lower.
Who's in my actual Final Four?
Yeah, exactly.
I'll say Houston, but I could see Illinois.
Well, that's 2 number 1 seeds. So you better not have a third.
Why not?
Because that doesn't happen.
Oh, come on.
No, 4.
No, you can take it.
Three
You can take
happens.
it.
3
I'm
number
not
ones
saying-
happen.
No, it has happened. Yeah.
You know what? Look,
Four.
I won't pick Duke. Duke was in my Final Four
Right.
preseason, and now they would be probably, except for the fact that I've already taken 2 number 1s, and I could see 2 teams coming out of the East, so I'll just go with that. I think BYU and Alabama will face each other in an elite in a regional semi, and then the winner of that would face Duke. So I would take.
Well, just so you know, Mark has Alabama and I have BYU.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's going to be a good game, and either of them on their best day can beat Duke.
Got to fill out the bracket now.
I will go with BYU.
Wow. Uh-oh. That might be the kiss of death.
Now, Greg, I know.
Both of us have BYU.
Well, I know, Greg. You also said, I think, what was it?
Baylor.
Well, no, I think you said BYU or VCU, and I think did you finally decide?
Oh no, that's
on
that's
BYU?
Jim. Jim is really
Jim. Okay, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Jim's gonna ride VCU. Yeah.
Oh,
he
yeah,
likes
yeah,
BYU. Right. Yeah.
Let me
said,
also say this regarding Baylor, because
Yeah.
you're going to see it from me over the next few months. I've started writing for the Miami Heat portion of their Heat Index on SI, so I'm doing a lot of Heat stuff, and I'll be doing Orlando Magic stuff in a few months. But this kid, VJ Edgecombe, and I do draft stuff for everybody.
Yep.
VJ Edgecombe from Baylor reminds me of Dwayne Wade at Marquette.
Ooh, nice comparison.
And the frame is the same, but until Wade filled out, Wade looked exactly like that, lanky, and the way that he can take over games where he makes his teammates better. The only reason why I don't have Baylor making a run in this tournament is because I don't respect Scott Drew in big games, and
He's won a championship.
Yeah, exactly. A few years ago.
He's won 1 title. Look at
wow! He won 1 title.
Look at all the talent that he's had. He's had Keontae George recently.
That's
a lot of coaches have a lot of talent, but only one wins every year.
That's okay.
He's in a very exclusive club.
Have you been burned a lot by Scott Drew?
Like Brad Brownell went through that run where he consistently blew game after game, like big league. So I have a Scott Drew bias.
That's what I figured.
He's a heck of a nice guy. I have nothing.
By the way, Greg, you ended up going with Baylor? I'm sorry, with BYU instead of Baylor in the Final Four, right? Okay.
Yes.
So maybe VJ Edgecombe becomes a household name by taking down Duke.
Nice. I hope so. That would be nice.
But my point is that VJ Edgecombe is the reincarnation of Dwayne Wade. That's all I wanted to say.
If he can have half the career of Dwayne Wade, he'll have a great career.
He may ultimately be the 5th pick in this draft, which is what Wade went.
Okay, so give us your championship pick then. You got Auburn against Texas Tech.
We'll go Auburn.
All right, that's a 1. And then you have BYU at Houston.
Oh, definitely got to go Houston.
So, absolutely, because BYU, if they get to the Final Four, the one team they do not want to see is Houston. So, okay, so Houston and Auburn.
is this the year that Houston finally pulls through? I'd love to see it, but I'll go with Auburn.
All right. There you go. All right. So don't forget that Jim and I will be on the air in the mornings on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to wrap up the day before and take an early look ahead at the rest of the action. It's going to be so awesome. What's so great, Mark, about March Madness too is you got these 68 teams on Tuesday, and then by the end of the week, there's only 16 left.
Over
75%.
Over 75% of the field will be over. It will be out after the first weekend. It goes so quickly.
It's crazy, but that's the fun part of it. And then if we have like a bad week, we can kind of start all over again with the Sweet 16. And of course, you can have a bad week if you're as long as you're smart enough to purchase the March Madness guide, the college basketball newsletter from Playbook. So we have a link in the description for that. Check that out. And then maybe we'll do another live show here sometime in the next week or two as well. We were able to pull that off on Sunday night. We even had the opportunity to communicate with some of our viewers, so that was great.
Maybe we can do it this Sunday or Monday, since we will have had a weekend of action and there's not as many teams to talk about. So we don't need the prep time that we needed heading into this week, which is one of the reasons why I couldn't make it on Sunday night.
Yeah, we can do that. Maybe we'll do a live show on Monday night or something like that. So
the only problem with Sunday night is that the games end so late. So Monday might be, maybe, I don't know, maybe starting around 7 o'clock Eastern time or something.
What do they have games on at like 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday or something like that?
Well, that's when they end. Yeah. That's when
one or two of them.
It's crazy.
Yeah, late games usually start around 7 p.m. Well, no, it'd be later than that Eastern time. Usually start around 7 p.m. Pacific.
Yeah.
Hey, Greg, can we do our 60-second takes? But I got to be rolling here.
Yeah, we can do that. Let's go ahead and wrap it up with it. Matter of fact, Mark, why don't you get us started?
Okay. Talking about 60-second takes. I'm going to talk about here when Michigan State takes the floor in this year's big dance, they're going to do so knowing that they were not in the AP preseason top 25. And why is that important? There's a handicapper, an analytical handicapper, Ed Fang from the Power Rank, and he incorporates the AP preseason top 25 into everything he does analytically. It's the only thing that's not analytical. He does it because these teams that were in the AP preseason top 25 come back, and if they had a poor season, they come back real strong in this tournament here. This fact, over the last 20 years, there's never been a number 1 or number 2 seed in the tournament that was not in the AP top 25 that has reached the Final Four. So who gets there at this place? It's Michigan State, a number 2 seed who was not in the AP preseason top 25. If they don't make it to the Final Four, who takes their place? I'll vote for the Kansas Jayhawks, who was number 1 in the AP preseason top 25.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting. Matter of fact, I was looking at one of your coffee club early on. This was December 11th when you talked about, I think this was from Yahoo Sports. You said, early congratulations. Tennessee, Auburn, Iowa State, Duke, Kentucky, Marquette, Alabama, Gonzaga, Florida, Kansas, Purdue, Oregon. It's only December, but according to Yahoo Sports, history tells us one of the top 12 teams in this week's men's AP poll will win the national championship. The streak has been that the past 20 national champions were all ranked in the top 12 over the respective seasons' week 6 AP poll. So there you go. That's from the Coffee Club on December 11th.
And week six would be somewhere around what? Late December. Right before conference.
Early December, early mid. Yeah, okay. I guess you're right. Yes, right around there. Yep. All right. So, Andy, short?
All set. I'm going to take a look at what we talked about a little bit earlier, and that is North Carolina's performance last night. North Carolina, a team that was expected to have great expectations, was barely fortunate enough to get into the tournament. And I'm wondering if other teams, and it sort of goes with what you and Mark were just talking about, teams that were expected to do very well, if they have been, I won't say laying low, but they've been playing the regular season to get prepared. So maybe we will see good efforts out of teams like Kansas, maybe a team like a Gonzaga, etc. Maybe even a team like an Arkansas that had some expectations with John Calipari coming in and taking over. So I'm not going to say that what we saw last night out of North Carolina Carolina is going to be evident by some of these other teams, but I can certainly make a case for Kansas, which was a preseason #1 team, and to a lesser extent Gonzaga, who I think they knew coming into the season they were the best team in the West Coast Conference. They saved it for the conference tournament, but at the same time, they've also had some success in preseason non-conference games. So I'll go with those that theory for those two teams.
All right. And then we'll wrap it up. Tony, if you have one. Do you have a short for us tonight, Tony?
I do. Give me a second.
Okay.
Just so I can make sure that I'm not speaking
By the way, Greg, I left out UConn as another one of those teams.
incorrectly, but I believe I'm right here.
Not intentionally.
Okay.
Just oversight.
I'm just going to look
And
at the schedule real quick.
Mark, we have the link in the description for the newsletter, specifically on Playbook, or if anybody else wants to know whether or not there's any other packages that come along with the newsletter. How can you educate any of the fans out there?
What it is, Greg, is this tournament guide is available for purchase at playbooksports.com, or if anybody decides to join me for the March Madness tournament, this is also included as a no-charge bonus. Also, the coffee club comes with it as well. So everything we're doing, you can check it out online at playbooksports.com.
All right, Tony. Are you
All right,
ready?
we're ready. I'm going to give you a first-round blowout to go ahead and line your pockets with. Tennessee laying only 18.5 against Wofford. And I needed to go back and check specifically this, but the best team that Wofford has played this season was Duke. Duke beat them 86-35. And the reason the Wofford Terriers are in this tournament is because they got hot at the right time and were able to, specifically the right time, they were able to beat Furman in a championship game where they were down, I think it was 6 to 8 points within 2 minutes, and turned that around with a ridiculous shooting spree. I was on the receiving end of that. They beat VMI in the semifinal and looked really crisp. They must have shot near 60% in that game. That's obviously not going to happen against Tennessee. It's the best defensive team they'll play all season. Vols by 20+, lay the points.
And I was under the impression that 86-35 game was because all eligible Wofford players had fouled out 2 minutes into the second half, and they had to play 4-on-5 the rest of the way.
No, that means they couldn't handle Duke's first foul.
Yeah.
All right, Mark. So that's going to wrap it up. We'll talk about the Sweet 16 on this show next week.
Okay, guys, we'll look forward to that. A great show once again. I want to thank everybody that was on the panel here today. Andy Iskoe from TheLogicalApproach.com, Tony Mejia, Playbook expert and contributor to the Sporting News, Jim Feist, the legend himself in Las Vegas, and our extraordinary producer, Greg DePalma. Until next week when we get into the Sweet 16 talk.
Hello.
This is Mark Lawrence. Yes, Andy, go ahead.
No, he's talking to someone else.
He's on the phone.
Reminding everybody to bet with your head, not over it, and I'll catch you next week. Thank you.